Have you ever wondered what happens when we close our eyes and drift off to sleep? Where do our minds go? The ancient Greeks had a fascinating answer. They imagined a place, a realm shrouded in mist and shadow, ruled by a gentle yet powerful god. Today, we're embarking on a journey into the mythical underworld to find the cave of Hypnos, the Greek god of sleep. Let's peel back the veil of night and explore the secrets hidden within his silent domain. Hypnos, whose name literally means sleep in Greek, wasn't a fearsome deity like some of his Olympian counterparts. He was a primordial god, a child of Nyx, the goddess of night, and Erebus, the god of darkness. His twin brother was Thanatos, the god of peaceful death. Together, they represented the two sides of the same coin, the temporary rest of sleep and the eternal rest of death. Unlike the often dreaded Thanatos, Hypnos was seen as a benevolent force, a friend to mortals and gods alike. He was depicted as a young, beautiful man, sometimes with wings on his brow or shoulders, carrying a horn of sleep-inducing opium, a poppy stem, or a branch dripping water from the river Lethe, the river of forgetfulness. So where did this powerful god reside? According to ancient poets like Ovid, Hypnos lived in a dark, sunless cave located in the depths of the Greek underworld, or sometimes in a distant land beyond the setting sun, a place called Samaria. This was a land perpetually shrouded in mist and fog, where the light of day never pierced the gloom. The entrance to his cave was said to be surrounded by poppies and other hypnotic plants, their very presence lulling visitors into a deep slumber before they even set foot inside. Imagine stepping into this cave. There is no rooster to crow at dawn, no barking dog to break the silence. The only sound is the gentle, murmuring flow of the river Lethe, which runs through the cave. Its waters were believed to induce complete forgetfulness in those who drank from them. This wasn't just any river. It was the very source of oblivion, washing away the cares and memories of the waking world. The air itself would be heavy, thick, with a soporific quality, making your eyelids feel like lead. At the heart of the cave, Hypnos himself would be found, resting on a soft, ebony couch, surrounded by his countless sons, the Oneroi. These were the personifications of dreams. The most famous of the Oneroi were Morpheus, who shaped the dreams of humans, appearing in their form, Icelus, or Phobeter, who created frightening dreams and took the form of beasts, and Phantasos, who crafted inanimate, surreal dream objects. It was from this cave that they were dispatched each night, flying out to the world of mortals to deliver dreams of every kind prophetic, fantastical, or terrifying. The Cave of Hypnos wasn't just a physical location in myth, it was a powerful symbol. It represents the transition from consciousness to unconsciousness, the journey our minds take every single night. The absolute silence of the cave reflects the way sleep shuts out the noise and chaos of our daily lives, offering a sanctuary for rest and recovery. The river Lethe flowing through it symbolizes the mental reset that sleep provides. It's how we forget the minor anxieties and stresses of the day, allowing our minds to wake up refreshed and clear. Think about it. How often have you gone to bed with a problem, only to wake up with a new perspective, or find that it doesn't seem so overwhelming anymore? That's the power of the river Lethe at work in our own minds. The Oneroi, the dream bringers, represent the vast, mysterious landscape of our subconscious. Morpheus, the shaper of human forms, speaks to our social dreams, our interactions, and relationships. Phobeter, the bringer of nightmares, reflects our deepest fears and anxieties, the things we try to suppress during the day. And Phantasos, the creator of fantastical objects, represents our creativity, our imagination, and the surreal, often nonsensical nature of our dream worlds. The Cave of Hypnos is the stage upon which these internal dramas unfold. This myth has had a profound impact on our culture and language. The word hypnosis comes directly from Hypnosis's name. Insomnia is derived from the Latin somnus, the Roman equivalent of hypnos. The poppy, a plant found at his cave's entrance, became the source of opium and its derivatives, like morphine, which is named after Morpheus, the shaper of dreams. These connections show how the ancient Greeks' understanding of sleep, personified in this myth, continues to influence our modern scientific and medical vocabulary. Artists and writers throughout history have been captivated by this imagery, from ancient pottery showing Hypnos gently carrying the body of a fallen warrior to romantic paintings depicting his serene, dream-filled slumber. The god of sleep has been a constant source of inspiration. He represents a universal human experience, a peaceful escape from the toils of life. He's not a god to be worshipped with grand temples, but one to be appreciated in the quiet moments before we fall asleep. Even modern psychology echoes the themes found in the myth of Hypnos' cave. Carl Jung's concept of the collective unconscious, a shared pool of memories and ideas in the human psyche, resonates with the idea of a universal dream realm. The role of dreams in processing emotions and memories. A key area of sleep research is a scientific echo of the nightly missions of the Onaroi. Our brain, in its own way, becomes the cave of Hypnos each night. It shuts down external stimuli, processes the day's events, and generates the vivid narratives we call dreams. The myth serves as a beautiful metaphor for the importance of rest. In our fast-paced, always-on world, we often view sleep as a luxury or even a waste of time. But the Greeks understood it as something sacred, a divine gift essential for well-being. Hypnos was not a lazy god. He was a vital one. He provided the rest that allowed heroes to fight another day, thinkers to have their breakthroughs, and everyone to heal, both physically and mentally. His cave was a necessary retreat, a place of profound restoration. So, the next time you feel your eyelids growing heavy and the world beginning to fade, picture yourself on a journey. You're not just falling asleep, you're traveling to a timeless, mythical place. You're approaching the silent cave, surrounded by poppies where the gentle murmur of the river Lethe. You're entering the domain of Hypnos, the benevolent god who will grant you the precious gift of rest and send his sons to paint the canvas of your mind with dreams. This ancient story reminds us to honor our sleep, to see it not as an interruption, but as an essential part of our existence, a nightly pilgrimage to a place of peace, forgetfulness, and renewal. It's a journey into the deepest parts of ourselves, guided by a gentle god with wings on his brow. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the cave of Hypnos. If you enjoyed this dive into mythology, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more explorations of the ancient world. Sweet dreams. The darkness around you thickens, but not in a threatening way. It's more like a weighted blanket made of shadow, gently pressing in from all sides. You sit there in Hypnos' cave, listening to the hush, and your mind drifts backward farther than Olympus, farther than thunder, into the deep genealogy of the cosmos itself. Because before there was sleep as a nightly routine, there was sleep as a being. In the oldest surviving Greek cosmology, recorded by Hesiod in the 8th century BCE, Hypnos emerges from primordial forces. He is the son of Nyx night personified and, intriguingly, he has no listed father. Nyx herself is born from chaos, that yawning gap at the beginning of everything. So when you sit here in this cave, you're not just near a god with a cozy nap schedule. You're in the presence of something that predates the Olympian soap opera entirely. Mainstream myth tells you that Hypnos and his twin brother, Thanatos, dwelled together in the Underworld's vicinity. Sleep and death. Siblings. Not enemies, not opposites. Just family. The Greeks weren't subtle about symbolism. You can almost hear them saying, "Look, it's the same thing." But one of them sends you back in the morning. Historians still argue whether this twinship reflects a philosophical meditation on mortality or a more practical observation that sleep looks suspiciously like a temporary rehearsal for death. Ancient people without EEG, machines, or sleep studies noticed how the body grows still. The breath slows, the eyes close, and consciousness vanishes. It's not hard to see why they depersonify that as death's gentler brother. A quirky fringe tradition found in some later Orphic fragments suggests that Hypnos didn't just lull mortals, he even soothed the gods at the dawn of creation, calming the chaotic energies that threatened to spiral out of control. Think of him as cosmic chamomile tea. Whether that's early theology or poetic embellishment is still debated. But it adds a lovely layer to the myth. Sleep as stabilizer of the universe. You picture Nyx now. In Hesiod's account, even Zeus fears her. That's a mainstream detail, and it's telling. Zeus might toss thunderbolts like confetti at a storm-themed parade, but Night herself commands a deeper, older authority. Hypnos, as her son, carries that same ancient gravity. His power doesn't flash, it envelops. You run your fingers along the cave wall and imagine Nyx spreading her veil across the sky each evening. The Greeks saw night not as absence, but as presence, a goddess stepping forward, and from her comes sleep, not from daylight, not from civilization, but from darkness. There's something almost comforting about that lineage. Sleep isn't an interruption of life. It's woven into the very fabric of the cosmos. When you yawn, you're participating in a ritual older than Olympus that's either beautiful or mildly overwhelming, depending on how much caffeine you've had. The cave seems deeper now, as if the mention of primordial ancestry has expanded it. You imagine Hypnos himself, often depicted as a youthful figure with wings sprouting from his temples or shoulders. Those wings aren't decorative. They symbolize how swiftly sleep descends. One moment you're scrolling through your thoughts, the next, you're gone. There's a mainstream historical detail here, that easy to overlook. Greek artists consistently portrayed Hypnos as gentle and serene, unlike many other gods who radiate tension or dominance. Vase paintings from the 5th century BCE show him with soft features, sometimes carrying a horn of sleep-inducing liquid. Art historians note how rarely he appears in violent scenes. He is not conquest, he is surrender. And yet, surrender in Greek thought is not weakness, it's inevitability. Even heroes like Achilles that Achilles must eventually lie down and close their eyes. In Homer's epics, sleep is described as sweet and loosening of limbs. That phrase alone feels like it belongs in a spa brochure. Historians still argue whether Homer's depiction of sleep reflects early ritual practices or simply poetic convention. Did Greeks pray directly to Hypnos before bed? There's limited hard evidence of formal cult worship dedicated solely to him. Unlike Athena or Apollo, he didn't have massive temples dominating city skylines. That absence is a historical fact. Sleep didn't require marble columns. It required darkness and trust. You lean back further, imagining Hypnos and Thanatos as twins resting side by side. One quiet, one final. It's almost funny cosmic gallows humor without the gallows. The Greeks had a way of acknowledging heavy truths without flinching. Death isn't banished. He's given a brother who visits nightly to practice. A fringe tidbit from later Hellenistic writers claims that some mystic sects attempted to invoke Hypnos deliberately to receive divine visions, believing that controlled sleep could thin the veil between mortal and divine realms. Whether that was widespread or just niche spiritual experimentation is uncertain. Scholars debate it, and the evidence is fragmentary at best, but the idea lingers. Sleep not just as rest, but as access. The cave air feels thicker now, almost velvety against your skin. You notice how your breathing matches the slow, steady rhythm of the unseen river outside. Lethe continues its soft murmur, as if reminding you that forgetting is part of the deal. Every night, you forget the day, not permanently, just enough. And perhaps that's the deeper gift of Hypnos' birth story. He isn't an Olympian politician. He isn't flashy. He is older than their arguments, older than their rivalries. Born of night, twin to death, he occupies a threshold space. You shift slightly on the stone ledge, and even that small movement feels amplified in the hush. No thunder intrudes. No divine quarrel echoes down here, just the steady inheritance of darkness. In this cave, you understand that sleep isn't an afterthought tacked onto existence. It's foundational. It was born alongside the earliest forces, cradled by night herself. And as your eyelids grow heavier, you can almost imagine Nyx spreading her starflecked cloak overhead, her sun moving silently through the world, brushing foreheads with invisible wings. Not to conquer, just to close your eyes. You leave the cave just long enough in your imagination to compare it with the alternative, because to understand why Hypnos prefers a quiet cave, you have to picture what he's avoiding, and that means a brief, slightly reluctant stroll up toward Mount Olympus. Immediately, the volume increases. Not literally, of course, this is myth, but symbolically. It's like walking from a library into a family dinner, where half the relatives control the weather. Mainstream Greek mythology situates the 12 Olympian gods atop Mount Olympus, the highest mountain in Greece in the real world. That's a factual geographic detail. Olympus rises to just under 3,000 meters and was visible from miles away, which likely inspired its divine reputation. Ancient Greeks genuinely believed the peak was veiled in clouds because the gods dwelled there. Climbers in antiquity didn't exactly pack snacks and hike up to check. Respect and a healthy fear of lightning kept most people at a distance. Up here, you can almost hear the clatter of golden goblets. Zeus is holding court, probably mid-lecture about order and justice. While simultaneously planning to transform into livestock for romantic purposes, He contains multitudes. Hera is watching him with the calm expression of someone absolutely not buying his explanation. Ares is pacing. Athena is judging everyone silently but efficiently. It's not restful. In Homer's Iliad, Olympus is described as a place of feasting, debate, and divine intervention in mortal affairs. The gods argue loudly about which side of the Trojan War deserves their support. They storm off, they return, they throw insults sharper than spears. That's a mainstream literary fact. The Olympians are deeply involved in human drama, and they are not subtle about it. Historians still argue whether these divine squabbles reflect political tensions in early Greek city-states. Were the gods behaving like aristocratic elites because that's what Greek audiences understood best? Or were these stories purely narrative devices to explain natural chaos? The debate is ongoing, and like most academic debates, it probably involves a lot of coffee. Now imagine Hypnos trying to nap up here. Zeus' thunder alone would be an issue. Ancient Greeks attributed storms directly to Zeus' will, and thunder was seen as a sign of his presence or anger. It's hard to achieve REM sleep when the sky itself might explode at any moment. Even ambrosia-fueled banquets would stretch late into eternity. There's also the matter of ego. Olympus is hierarchical. Power is visible, displayed, reinforced. Thrones, symbols, weapons, radiant armor. Hypnos doesn't really fit that aesthetic. He doesn't carry a trident or a lightning bolt. His domain is subtle. You don't see sleep coming. You feel it. A quirky fringe tradition, preserved in later commentaries, suggests that Hypnos was considered one of the few beings Zeus could not fully command. He could request sleep, he could threaten consequences, but he couldn't abolish it. That detail is telling. Even the king of gods must eventually close his eyes. Imagine the cosmic irony. Ruler of the sky, defeated nightly by a soft-spoken deity with poppy flowers. You wander through Olympus in your mind's eye. The floors gleam. The air smells faintly of nectar and divine perfume. Muses rehearse hymns somewhere in the background. Apollo might be tuning a lyre. It's beautiful, but it's busy. Always busy. In contrast, the cave you left behind doesn't compete. It doesn't shimmer. It doesn't announce itself. It absorbs. Mainstream archaeological evidence shows that major Olympian gods had elaborate temples throughout Greece, massive stone structures like the Parthenon, dedicated to Athena. Hypnos, not so much. There's no grand surviving temple exclusively devoted to him. That absence isn't accidental. Sleep doesn't gather crowds at noon. It slips in quietly at night. Historians still argue whether Hypnos had small, localized cults that simply left little trace, or whether his worship was more symbolic and folded into broader chthonic practices associated with the underworld. The record is thin. Silence, once again, surrounds him. You can almost sense why he wouldn't want Olympus. Up here, everyone is performing. Every gesture is symbolic. Every glance carries political weight. Down in the cave, there's no audience, no expectations, just the steady rhythm of breathing. And let's be honest, Olympus has a family dynamic that could exhaust a saint. Affairs, rivalries, grudges that last centuries. Even immortals need boundaries. Hypnos, as son of night, occupies a different layer of existence. He doesn't need applause. He needs darkness. There's something profoundly modern about that choice. In a world Ivan, a mythological one overflowing with spectacle, choosing a cave feels radical. It's the ancient equivalent of turning off notifications. You slowly drift back down the mountainside in your imagination. Away from the gleam and gossip, the air cools, the noise fades. The thunder becomes a distant grumble. By the time you reach the cave entrance again, the contrast is undeniable. Olympus dazzles, the cave restores. Olympus commands attention, the cave dissolves it. Hypnos didn't reject Olympus out of weakness. He simply understood his nature. Sleep cannot thrive in constant drama. It requires surrender, not spectacle. You step back into the dim interior, and the hush wraps around you like a familiar coat. No lightning, no arguments. Just the soft murmur of lethe and the faint scent of poppies. And as you settle once more against the cool stone, you realize something almost rebellious. The most powerful act in a world of noise might be closing your eyes. The deeper you settle into the cave, the more you notice that the silence isn't absolute. It has texture. A soft undercurrent threads through it, steady and unhurried. That faint murmur you've even hearing ESNT, imagination it, the river Lethe gliding past the mouth of Hypnos sanctuary, carrying with it the gentle art of forgetting. In mainstream Greek cosmology, Lethe is one of the 5 rivers of the underworld, described in various ancient sources, including later summaries of earlier oral traditions. Its name literally means forgetfulness or concealment. Souls, upon entering the realm of Hades, drink from Lethe to erase the memories of their previous lives before reincarnation. That's not fringe, that's part of established mythic geography. The Greeks imagined the afterlife not as a single hallway, but as a watery network of symbolic currents. You edge closer to the cave's entrance and listen. Lethe does not roar, it barely whispers. If Olympus is a crashing cymbal, Lethe is a steady exhale. The sound alone explains why Hypnos might have chosen this address. Forgetfulness and sleep are old companions. Every night, you surrender the details of your day. You don't permanently lose them, hopefully, but you loosen your grip. Historians still argue whether the Greeks envisioned Lethe as a literal subterranean river inspired by real karst springs and underground waterways common in parts of Greece, or whether it was always metaphorical. The geography of myth often mirrors physical landscapes. Caves with hidden streams certainly existed. Stand near one long enough, and you'd swear it was telling you secrets. There's also a quirky Orphic tradition, more mystical than mainstream, that claims initiates were instructed not to drink from Lethe in the afterlife, but instead to seek the pool of Mnemosyne, memory. Gold tablets found in graves in southern Italy and Crete give directions for the soul, advising it to avoid Lethe and choose remembrance instead. Scholars debate how widespread this belief was, but it adds an intriguing layer. Forgetting might be peaceful, but remembering grants power. You imagine Hypnos hearing Lethe night after night. The river becomes a lullaby. Its constancy shapes the atmosphere of the cave. Even the air seems to move in rhythm with it. There's no abrupt splash, no dramatic waterfall, just continuity. Mainstream classical writers often link sleep with a kind of temporary death. The connection between Hypnos and his twin brother Thanatos reinforces that idea, but Lethe adds nuance. Sleep isn't just stillness, it's amnesia, a soft reset. You lie down, burdened with thoughts. You wake up with them rearranged, some faded, some sharpened. The Greeks didn't have neuroscience, but they recognized the phenomenon. And here's a gentle irony. In modern psychology, we now know that sleep plays a critical role in memory consolidation. During certain sleep stages, the brain strengthens important memories and discards trivial ones. So the mythic river of forgetting coexists with the biological necessity of remembering. Historians still argue whether ancient observers intuited this connection or whether we're reprojecting modern knowledge backward onto poetic metaphors. Either way, it's a lovely overlap. You kneel near the cave's edge, imagining cool mist brushing your face. Lethe's surface would be dark, reflecting no stars, because this is the underworld's borderland. And yet, it doesn't feel sinister, like it feels necessary, like a filing cabinet for consciousness. There's a reason the cave isn't placed beside a raging torrent. Sleep cannot compete with chaos. It pairs with repetition. The steady rhythm of the river mirrors breathing. Inhale, exhale, forget, remember. A lesser-known fringe anecdote from late antiquity suggests that some storytellers imagined Lethe's waters as slightly sweet to the taste, making souls eager to drink. Whether that detail originated in ritual imagination or poetic embellishment remains unclear. Scholars debate it, as they do most things that involve half-buried inscriptions and poetic fragments, but the sweetness makes symbolic sense. Forgetting, after all, can be merciful. You sit back again, listening more intently. The cave's ceiling seems to absorb even the suggestion of echo. The river's murmur doesn't bounce, it melts. If you concentrate, you can almost time your breathing to it. Olympus, with its thunder and proclamations, feels impossibly distant now. Even Zeus, master of storms, cannot penetrate this softness. Lightning may split the sky, but it cannot ripple Lethe's current down here. In a world defined by memory, by epic poems, heroic deeds, grudges carried across generations, the presence of Lethe is radical. It offers release, not oblivion necessarily, just pause. You realize that Hypnos' choice of residence isn't random decoration, it's thematic architecture. A cave muffles sound, a river erases edges. Together, they create an environment where consciousness can loosen without fear. Historians still argue whether the proximity of Hypnos to Hades realm suggests he was originally a chthonic deity and underworld force later, softened in popular imagination. The lines between Olympian and underworld gods were not always rigid. Myths evolved, attributes shifted, but the cave and the river remain consistent symbols of depth and retreat. You lean against the stone once more. The scent of damp earth mixes with the faint sweetness of imagined poppies. The river continues its endless glide. No rush, no urgency, and as your thoughts begin to thin, you understand something simple and profound. Sleep is not an abrupt shutdown. It's a gradual drifting downstream, carried by a current that asks nothing of you except to let go. The cave holds you. The river hums, and the world above, loud and glittering, feels very far away. The scent reaches you before the sight does soft, slightly sweet, faintly earthy. It drifts through the cave like a suggestion rather than a command. When your eyes adjust to the low light, you notice them scattered along the edges of the cavern floor, and trailing near the entrance, pale blossoms with dark centers, delicate and unassuming. Poppies. In classical art, Hypnos is frequently depicted holding or crowned with poppies. That detail isn't poetic fluff. It reflects a real botanical awareness in the ancient Mediterranean world. The opium poppy, Papaver somniferum, was known to the Greeks and other ancient cultures for its sedative properties. Archaeological evidence suggests that opium use in the region dates back thousands of years, even to Minoan Crete. Small figurines from the late Bronze Age have been found with poppy-shaped crowns, which many scholars interpret as references to ritual or medicinal use. That's a mainstream historical fact, not just dreamy symbolism. You crouch near one of the blossoms in the cave and imagine its fragile petals trembling in the still air. It's almost funny that something so powerful grows so quietly. No thunderclap, no dramatic glow, just a flower doing what it does best. Sleep, apparently, prefers subtle marketing. Historians still argue whether the poppy became associated with Hypnos because of widespread medicinal knowledge, or whether the myth inspired greater ritual use of the plant. It's the classic chicken or egg debate, except the chicken is a god and the egg is mildly narcotic. Either way, the connection stuck. In later Greek and Roman iconography, both Hypnos and his Roman counterpart, somnists carry poppies as symbols of their domain. The continuity across cultures suggests that the association was more than decorative. The ancients understood that certain plants could calm the body and quiet the mind. They didn't know about neurotransmitters, but they observed effects. You run your fingers lightly over the stone beside the flower, careful not to disturb it. There's something fitting about a god of sleep surrounding himself with flora that embody drowsiness. No marble columns, no blazing torches, just gentle botanicals doing their quiet work. A quirky fringe tidbit from ancient herbal lore claims that poppy seeds were sometimes placed beneath pillows to encourage vivid dreams. Whether this was common practice or limited to certain regions is debated, but the belief itself reveals something intimate. Sleep wasn't merely endured, it was cultivated. The Greeks, like us, sought better rest. They just did it with myth and flowers instead of white noise apps. The cave feels softer now, as if the presence of the poppies absorbs even your stray thoughts. Their pale shapes glow faintly in the dimness, not bright enough to distract, just enough to reassure. You imagine Hypnos walking through this space, brushing his fingers over the petals, perhaps gathering a few to weave into a crown. In vase paintings from the 5th century BCE, he's often youthful, winged, serene, ever tense. The poppies reinforce that mood. Meanwhile, up on Olympus, banquets likely stretch into eternity. Zeus might command storms, but he does not command circadian rhythm. Even he, at some point, must yield to Hypnos' domain. And down here, among flowers that whisper rather than shout, that inevitability feels almost kind. There's also a practical dimension. Caves in the ancient Greek landscape often hosted unique plant growth near their entrances due to moisture and filtered light. It's entirely plausible that real grottos with unusual flora inspired the imagery of Hypnos' dwelling. Historians still argue whether specific caves perhaps in regions like Epirus or near the Black Sea fed into poetic descriptions. The evidence isn't conclusive, but the natural world certainly shaped mythic imagination. You sit back and let the scent settle around you. It's not overpowering, it doesn't demand attention. It simply exists, like an ambient note in the background of consciousness. That's the genius of it. Sleep doesn't crash in like a dramatic guest. It lingers at the edge until you notice you're already halfway gone. In ancient Greek medicine, particularly in the writings attributed to Hippocratic traditions, sleep was considered essential for balancing bodily humors. While those medical theories are outdated now, the recognition of sleep's restorative power was very real. They understood that rest healed. The poppy, as both symbol and substance, fit neatly into that worldview. And yet, there's a cautionary undertone. Opium can soothe, but it can also overwhelm. The Greeks were aware of its potency. That duality mirrors the relationship between Hypnos and his twin brother Thanatos. Gentle sleep and final sleep share a boundary. Too much of the flower, and the line blurs. The myth quietly acknowledges that edge without dwelling on it. You glance again at the blossoms, appreciating their restraint. They don't dominate the cave, they accent it, like nature's version of soft lighting. A faint smile touches your face as you realize something Hypnos curated his environment. The cave isn't random wilderness, it's intentional minimalism. Darkness, steady water, sleep-inducing flora. No clutter, no drama. It's practically a masterclass in bedtime design. Historians still argue whether the Greeks consciously layered all this symbolism or whether later interpreters have woven threads that were originally separate. But standing, or rather, sitting here in this imagined cave, the coherence feels undeniable. The poppies sway ever so slightly, though there is no wind. Perhaps it's only your breathing, or perhaps it's the soft beat of unseen wings. You lean back once more, letting the scent cradle your senses. The flowers do not rush you, they do not insist. They simply accompany the slow descent into rest. And in their quiet presence, you understand why Hypnos never needed Olympus' glittering halls. He had petals, stone, and silence. Honestly, that's more than enough. The cave remains still, but you sense a subtle shift in the atmosphere, like the air acknowledging another presence. Not loud, not dramatic, just a faint deepening, as though the shadows themselves have gained weight. You remember that Hypnos is not alone in the cosmic family tree. He has a twin. And twins, especially in myth, rarely stray far from one another. From the dim corridor of the cave, you imagine the quiet approach of Thanatos. Not skeletal, not monstrous. In early Greek art, Thanatos appears as a winged youth, much like his brother Hypnos. Vase paintings from the 6th and 5th centuries BCE depict the two carrying the body of the fallen hero. Sarpedon from the battlefield of Troia, mainstream mythological scene described in Homer's Iliad. That detail is firmly embedded in classical tradition. Sleep and death. Working together, lifting gently rather than violently, you picture them side by side now in the cave, one radiating softness, the other finality. It's an oddly calm pairing. There's no rivalry between them in the myths, no dramatic betrayal, just an acknowledgement of shared purpose. Historians still argue whether the Greeks intended this twinship as comfort or warning. Was it meant to soothe people with the idea that death is merely a deeper sleep, or to remind them that sleep is a daily rehearsal for mortality? Interpretations vary, and scholars have filled many pages debating the tone of that symbolism. Thanatos steps closer in your imagination, his wings darker than Hypnos perhaps, his expression serene rather than grim. Unlike later medieval personifications of death scythe-wielding and skeletal, the Greek Thanatos is restrained. He does not chase, he arrives when the time is woven into fate. That distinction matters. The Greeks had other figures for violent death or chaos. Thanatos represents the quiet, inevitable close. A quirky fringe tradition preserved in later mythographic summaries suggests that Thanatos once tried to claim the clever king Sisyphus, only to be tricked and temporarily imprisoned. Yes, death himself, tied up like an awkward house guest. During that period, mortals stopped dying altogether, which caused such cosmic inconvenience that the gods had to intervene. It's almost comedic imagined paperwork piling up in the underworld. Eventually, Thanatos was freed and order resumed. The story highlights something subtle. Even death operates within structure. You sit still, letting that settle. Hypnos and Thanatos are not enemies of humanity in the myths. They are inevitabilities. One visits nightly, the other once. There's something profoundly gentle about their shared imagery in Greek art. On certain funerary vases, the two brothers appear almost tender as they bear the fallen away, not dragging, not tearing, carrying. That artistic choice reflects a mainstream cultural reality. Ancient Greeks held complex, often somber views of mortality, but they did not always depict it as grotesque. It could be solemn, even dignified. You imagine Thanatos pausing at the edge of the cave, exchanging no words with Hypnos because words would feel too loud here. Their communication is silent understanding. After all, what would they argue about? They govern adjacent territories. Historians still argue whether Thanatos was widely worshipped or primarily symbolic. Unlike major Olympians, he had little formal cult presence. His power was acknowledged, not celebrated. The lack of grand temples mirrors Hypnos' own understated worship. Both brothers dwell more in poetry and image than in marble. The cave seems deeper with Thanatos' imagined presence, yet not colder, just heavier. Like the difference between a nap and a final rest is measured not in temperature, but in permanence. You consider how the Greeks saw sleep as a liminal stata threshold. In dreams, mortals might receive messages from gods. In death, souls cross fully into the domain of Hades. The boundary between the two states feels thin here in the cave, as if the stone itself remembers countless crossings. There's a strange comfort in the twinship. Sleep prepares you. It practices letting go. Each night you surrender consciousness and trust that morning will return you. The Greeks embedded that trust into myth. Hypnos brings you back, Thanatos does not. But neither is chaotic. Both are woven into cosmic order. A soft, almost humorous thought drifts through your mind. If Olympus is a noisy banquet hall, this cave is the backstage area where the final curtain is rehearsed. Not morbid, just organized. The universe, apparently, values good scheduling. The river Lethe continues its quiet murmur outside. Forgetfulness for the dead, rest for the living. The poppies remain still. Even Thanatos, in your imagination, does not disturb them. Mainstream scholarship notes that the Greeks often personified abstract concepts victory as Nike strife as Eris, sleep as Hypnos. This wasn't Tinavit. It was narrative strategy. By giving form to inevitabilities, they made them relatable. You can't argue with an abstraction, but you can picture a winged youth and feel less alone. Historians still argue whether this personification reflects early animistic beliefs or later poetic development. The answer likely shifts across centuries. Myths evolve. Interpretations layer. You lean back once more against the cool stone. In your mind's eye, Thanatos steps away as quietly as he arrived, leaving Hypnos to his nightly rounds. The cave lightens not brighter, but less dense. Sleep remains. And as you feel your own awareness softening, you understand why Hypnos prefers this place. Here, even death is gentle. Here, inevitability wears wings instead of armor. The cave does not deny the end. It simply teaches you how to rest before it. The cave is calm now, but memory stirs the air, not your memory. Exactly, but the kind that belongs to myth itself. Because as peaceful as this sanctuary is, there was a time when its quiet was shattered by a request so risky that even you feel a slight tension in your shoulders. It begins, as many divine complications do, with Hera, Queen of Olympus, strategic, patient, not easily ignored. In the Iliad, a mainstream and foundational Greek epic attributed to Homer, Hera approaches Hypnos with a bold proposal. She wants him to lull Zeus to sleep, not for kindness, not for rest, but so she can meddle specifically so she can influence the outcome of the Trojan War. While Zeus is unconscious, you almost admire the audacity. Asking the literal embodiment of sleep to knock out the king of the gods is like requesting a light drizzle on the sun. Technically possible, potentially catastrophic. Historians still argue whether this episode reflects deeper themes of power balance among the Olympians, or simply adds dramatic tension to the epic. Either way, the stakes are unmistakable. Zeus is not known for gentle reactions when deceived. Lightning is kind of his thing. Now imagine Hypnos here in his cave when Hera first approaches him. The poppies are still. The river Lethe hums, and suddenly the Queen of the Gods is asking him to weaponize his gift. That's an important detail. Leap becomes a tool, not just rest, but strategy. According to Homer's account, Hypnos is hesitant, and with good reason. He reminds Hera that the last time he put Zeus to sleep also, at her request, Zeus woke up furious and would have hurled him into the sea if not for the protection of Nyx. That's a mainstream mythological detail. Even Zeus, thunderbolt enthusiast, hesitates to anger Night herself. You can almost see it, Zeus storming across Olympus, lightning crackling, demanding to know who dared close his eyes against his will. Hypnos fleeing not to Olympus' marble halls but to his mother's shadow. Night enveloping him like a cosmic legal shield. It's oddly touching. Even gods run to their mothers sometimes. A quirky tidbit often overlooked is that Hera bribes Hypnos in this episode. She promises him one of the Graces Pasithea as his wife if he agrees. Sleep, apparently, can be negotiated with marriage proposals. The transactional nature of this myth adds a layer of realism. Divine politics operate on favors and rewards, not just thunder. You shift slightly against the cave wall, imagining Hypnos weighing the offer. On one hand, defying Zeus is risky. On the other, Pasithea associated with relaxation and hallucination. In some traditions, would be a fitting partner. Historians still argue whether Pasithea's role evolved later to align symbolically with Hypnos' domain, or whether the pairing was part of older, now fragmentary traditions. The textual evidence leaves room for debate. Eventually, Hypnos agrees. In the Iliad, he disguises himself and waits for the right moment. Hera distracts Zeus with charm, and seduction ancient epic is never subtle while. Hypnos gently closes the king's eyes, and it works. Zeus sleeps. Let that sink in. The ruler of the sky, subdued not by force, but by softness. While Zeus slumbers, Hera manipulates events on the battlefield below, giving temporary advantage to the Greeks. It's a pivotal narrative moment. Sleep changes history, or at least epic history. There's something quietly profound here. Hypnos' power is subtle, but it's absolute. Even the most dominant figure in Greek mythology cannot permanently resist him. Zeus can command storms, but he cannot abolish exhaustion. That's almost comforting. Historians still argue whether this myth hints at an early understanding of the limits of authority. No ruler, divine or mortal, operates without rest. Fatigue humbles everyone. The Greeks, through story, acknowledged that truth. And yet, once Zeus awakens and realizes he's been tricked, his anger is immense. Hypnos survives only because of Nyx's protection. The cave, you realize, isn't just cozy, it's strategic. Far from Olympus' direct reach, protected by darkness, older than lightning. You look around at the stillness again. It's easy to forget, in this hush, that the cave once sheltered a fugitive god. Sleep itself had to hide from wrath. That adds texture to the quiet. It's not naive peace, it's chosen refuge. The river Lethe continues to murmur, indifferent to divine drama. The poppies remain undisturbed. And Hypnos, despite the risk he once took, still prefers this sanctuary to Olympus' grandeur. Maybe that's the lesson. Power used gently is still power. Silence can outmaneuver thunder. And sometimes the bravest act ISNT, fighting at S, closing someone SI's, at exactly the right moment. You settle deeper into the stone, imagining Zeus' thunder fading into distant memory. The cave holds its quiet, and Hypnos, ever patient, waits for the next pair of eyelids to grow heavy. You can almost feel the aftershock of that myth, lingering in the cave, the faint tension that follows when someone very powerful wakes up cranky, because when Zeus opens his eyes and realizes he's been outmaneuvered by a god whose primary weapon is vibes, the reaction is not mild irritation, it is thunder. In Homer's Iliad, Zeus awakens from the enchanted sleep and immediately senses that the tide of the Trojan War has shifted in his absence. That's a mainstream literary detail. The epic makes it clear that his slumber allowed Hera to influence events below, and when Zeus pieces it together, he is furious. Not sleepy furious, divine furious. Historians still argue whether this episode reflects ancient anxieties about vulnerability in leadership. After all, if the king of gods can be incapacitated, what does that say about cosmic order? Is sleep a threat to authority, or a reminder of its limits? Scholars debate whether Greek audiences saw this as comedic irony, political commentary, or simply narrative drama. Likely all three. You imagine Olympus at that moment. Clouds churn, thunder rolls, the other gods freeze mid-goblet. Zeus' voice probably echoes across the marble halls. And somewhere, in a cave far from the commotion, Hypnos is very carefully not making eye contact with the sky. There's a curious detail in the myth. Zeus does not ultimately punish Hypnos directly. He rages, he threatens, but he stops short. Why? Because of Nyx. In earlier tradition, Zeus fears Nyx enough to avoid direct confrontation. That's not a fringe idea, it's embedded in classical sources. Even the Thunderer respects night. This tells you something important. Sleep is protected by darkness. Not just literal darkness, but primordial force. Hypnos' cave is not random seclusion. It's alignment with something older than Olympus. Zeus may dominate the sky, but night precedes him. And when night spreads her cloak, even lightning dims. A quirky tidbit tucked into later commentaries suggests that Zeus's relationship with sleep was complicated in general. As ruler, he is portrayed as vigilant, ever watchful. In some poetic imagery, gods are described as ever-living and tireless, but the myth of Hera and Hypnos contradicts that. Even immortals require rest. The contradiction has intrigued classicists for centuries. Historians still argue whether divine sleep was metaphorical in some contexts and literal in others, depending on narrative needs. You picture Zeus pacing Olympus after the deception, thunderclouds gathering like an overdramatic mood ring. There's something almost relatable about it. You wake up from an unexpected nap and realize someone has rearranged your plans. Except in Zeus' case, rearranging plans might involve entire armies. And yet, for all his power, Zeus cannot outlaw sleep. He cannot decree no more naps. Hypnos' domain is woven into existence itself. Even gods operate within cosmic rhythms. Mainstream Greek belief held that natural phenomena, storms, tides, seasons, were expressions of divine will. But sleep was universal, democratic. It touched shepherds and kings alike. That universality is key. Hypnos doesn't discriminate. He visits Olympus as surely as he visits a fisherman's hut. You lean back against the cool stone and let that idea settle. Olympus thrives on spectacle and assertion. The cave thrives on surrender. Zeus commands attention. Hypnos dissolves it. Historians still argue whether the myth subtly critiques absolute power. By allowing Hera and Hypnos to outwit Zeus, even temporarily, the epic demonstrates that authority has cracks. Sleep becomes the great equalizer, not rebellion, not revolution, just inevitability. Outside, the imagined storm quiets. Thunder fades into distant rumble. The river Lethe resumes its steady whisper, as if nothing dramatic ever happened. That contrast is striking. Olympus explodes with emotion. The cave absorbs it. There's also an interesting symbolic layer. Zeus represents consciousness-awareness, control, will. Hypnos represents its suspension. When Zeus sleeps, control loosens. Events move beyond his oversight. It's a reminder that rest requires trust. You close your eyes believing the world won't unravel in your absence. Sometimes it does. Usually, it doesn't. A fringe interpretation from some modern mythologists suggests that this story encodes early observations about the strategic importance of timing in warfare attacks, launched when leaders are distracted or resting. Whether that's projecting modern analysis onto ancient poetry is debatable. Historians still argue whether such readings illuminate or overcomplicate the myth, but it's an intriguing angle. You smile faintly at the thought that even the sky god needs 8 hours, or at least a divine equivalent. The cave feels smug about it, not arrogant, just quietly confident. Thunder can shake mountains, but it cannot abolish biology, and perhaps that's why Hypnos prefers this place. Olympus is reactive, every slight answered, every insult magnified. The cave is steady. No one here raises their voice. No lightning scorches the ceiling. Zeus may resent the vulnerability sleep imposes, but he cannot escape it. Night falls, eyelids lower. Even the king and gods must drift. You feel your own awareness softening again, mirroring that ancient rhythm. Conscious thought loosens its grip. The world continues without your supervision. It always does. The cave holds steady. The river hums. And somewhere far above, Olympus eventually quiets, to be, because even thunder runs out of breath. You remain in the cave for a moment longer, but the story doesn't stay still. After Zeus's thunderous awakening and that narrow escape under Nyx's protection, there comes a time when caution feels wise, even for a god, especially for a god whose entire job description involves making others unconscious. And so you drift in imagination across the Aegean Sea to a quieter refuge, the island of Lemnos. In Homer's Iliad, when Hypnos recounts his earlier brush with Zeus' rage, he mentions fleeing to Lemnos. That's a mainstream textual detail. Lemnos is not a myth-only location. It's a real island in the northern Aegean, inhabited since prehistoric times. Archaeological evidence shows continuous settlement there dating back to the Bronze Age. So, when Hypnos chooses Lemnos as sanctuary, he isn't escaping to abstraction, he's retreating to geography. You picture the island rising from the sea, rocky and wind-brushed, less ostentatious than Olympus. Lemnos in myth is also associated with Hephaestus, who is said to have landed there after being cast from Olympus. Apparently, Lemnos has a reputation as the island for gods who've had a rough day. It's practically divine witness protection. Historians still argue whether Lemnos' mythological associations reflect its volcanic landscape. The island has geothermal activity, and in antiquity, unusual terrain often inspired supernatural stories. Fire from the earth must be a god. A quiet, distant island. Perfect hiding place. Myth and geology intertwine more often than we realize. You stand on Lemnos in your mind's eye. The air smells of salt and stone. The sea stretches endlessly, its surface shimmering under late afternoon light. Compared to Olympus grand theatrics, Lemnos feels grounded, mortal, real. It's almost amusing to think of Sleepwalk, inevitable Sleepwalk, because Zeus was in a mood. But that's Greek mythology for you. Even universal forces occasionally duck behind islands. A quirky fringe tradition suggests that Lemnos was considered a place of healing and strange rites, particularly connected to fire and transformation. Some ancient sources describe ritual practices involving earth and mineral deposits unique to the island. Scholars debate how directly these practices connect to the myths of Hephaestus or Hypnos, but the island's reputation as a liminal space is clear. It's neither fully Olympian nor entirely underworld, just slightly apart. You imagine Hypnos resting there after fleeing Zeus' wrath. Not panicked, just cautious. The sea breeze replaces the cave's stillness, but the effect is similar: soft, rhythmic, steady. Waves become a new lullaby. There's a subtle irony here. Zeus rules the sky, but he cannot control every corner of earth and sea simultaneously. Greek cosmology divides power among gods: Poseidon for the sea, Hades for the underworld, Zeus for the sky. Lemnos, ringed by water and rooted in earth, sits slightly outside Zeus' immediate, thunderous grasp. Historians still argue whether this geographic fragmentation of divine authority reflects political divisions among ancient Greek city-states. Each god has territory. No one god is truly absolute. You walk along Lemnos' imagined shoreline, noticing how different it feels from the cave. The cave is enclosed, womb-like. Lemnos is open, horizon-wide, yet both offer distance from Olympus noise. Mainstream archaeology confirms that Lemnos was a crossroads of cultures in antiquity Mycenaean. Later Greek even influences from Anatolia. Its strategic position in the northern Aegean made it significant in trade networks. So Hypnos' refuge isn't some forgotten speck. It's a place woven into real human history. That grounding makes the myth feel almost plausible. And perhaps that's why the detail persists in Homer's telling. It anchors divine drama in recognizable landscapes. When audiences heard Lemnos, they could picture it. They might have known sailors who'd been there. The story breathes easier when it touches real shores. You pause, listening to waves lap against rock. The sound is different from Lethea's murmur, brighter, more textured, but still soothing. Sleep adapts. It doesn't require one exact environment. It seeks rhythm, distance, safety. Historians still argue whether Hypnos' flight to Lemnos indicates genuine fear of Zeus or simply narrative tension. Was sleep truly threatened, or was this a poetic way to heighten Hera's scheme? The answer depends on how literally you read myth, but the emotional truth remains. Even powerful forces retreat when storms gather. You smile at the thought that Lemnos might have been a temporary sabbatical for Hypnos, a quiet island retreat after a stressful divine encounter. No lightning, no accusations, just sea, air, and horizon. Eventually, of course, he returns to his cave. The poppies wait. The river, Lethe, hums. Refuge shifts back to stillness. But Lemnos remains part of the story, a reminder that even sleep sometimes relocates for peace of mind. You let the imagined shoreline fade, returning once more to the cave's cool embrace. The lesson lingers. When thunder grows too loud, you find an island. When drama swells, you seek distance. Even gods, it seems, understand the value of stepping away. You settle back fully into the cave, leaving Lemnos and its sea breeze behind. The air grows still again, thick with poppy scent and the steady murmur of lethe. But you're not alone here, not really. Hypnos may prefer quiet, yet his domain is far from empty. Because in the deeper chambers of this cave dwell the Oneratha dreams. In mainstream Greek mythology, the Onera are the children of Hypnos. Their mother is sometimes named as Pasithea, one of the Charites, though sources vary. Most famously described by Ovid in the Metamorphoses, the Oneroi reside in their father's cavernous home, emerging each night like soft-winged messengers to visit sleeping mortals. That literary depiction is one of our clearest ancient descriptions of the cave's interior. You imagine them now not as a chaotic swarm, but as distinct presences moving gently through shadow. The most well-known among them is Morpheus, whose name literally means form or shape. Morpheus specializes in appearing in human guise, shaping dreams with recognizable faces and voices. If a king dreams of a trusted advisor delivering a message, that's Morpheus at work. Then there's Phobetor, sometimes called Aislos, who crafts dreams involving animals and beasts. And Phantasos, who conjures landscapes and inanimate things. Together, they divide the labor of illusion. It's surprisingly organized for something as slippery as dreaming. Historians still argue whether these named dream spirits were part of early Greek belief or later literary embellishments. Homer, in the Iliad and Odyssey, refers to dreams more abstractly, sometimes describing them as deceptive or truthful, depending on which gate they pass through: horn for truth, ivory for lies. That's a mainstream mythological motif. The fully individualized Oneroi appear more vividly in later sources, like Ovid. The evolution suggests that Greek thought about dreams grew more detailed over time. You glance into the deeper recesses of the cave. It's easy to imagine winged figures resting along the stone walls, waiting for night's cue. They are not loud, they do not chatter, they drift. Each carries the faint shimmer of potential narrative. There's a quirky fringe belief from some ancient commentators that dreams were thought to physically exit the cave through twin gates, a concept linked to Homer's imagery. Scholars debate whether the gates of horn and ivory were meant as a metaphor for clarity versus distortion horn being translucent. Ivory opacor, if the materials had ritual significance, now lost to us. Historians still argue whether audiences took this cosmology literally or poetically. You consider how dreams functioned in Greek epic. In the Iliad, Zeus sends a deceptive dream to Agamemnon, urging him toward battle under false confidence. That's a canonical episode. Dreams are not neutral entertainment. They influence decisions, sway wars, and test judgment. And yet, here in the cave, the atmosphere remains calm. The Oneroi do not appear malicious. They are craftsmen, storytellers, projectionists of the subconscious long before Freud ever put pen to paper. Yes, we're centuries early for that, but the comparison is irresistible. You imagine Morpheus stretching his wings, preparing to slip into the mind of a shepherd or a queen. His touch is light. He doesn't force images, he shapes them from existing memory. That detail, Morpheus, using familiar forms, reflects a sophisticated understanding of how dreams borrow from waking life. The ancients observed that dream figures often resemble people we know. They turned that observation into mythic specialization. Historians still argue whether the Onaroi represent an early attempt to categorize dream types' human interaction. Animal encounters, environmental imagery, it's tempting to see them as proto-psychological archetypes. But we must be careful not to retrofit modern frameworks onto ancient poetry. The line between insight and projection is thin. The cave seems alive now, though still hushed. Each shadow might conceal a dream waiting to be delivered. The river Lethe hums its counterpoint forgetfulness by day, imagination by night. There's something beautifully paradoxical here. Sleep itself is stillness, yet dreams are motion. Hypnos provides the blank canvas. His children paint across it. Without the cave's silence, the images would blur. Without rest, no narrative unfolds. You smile faintly at the thought that somewhere, right now, Morpheus might be staging an elaborate drama in someone. S-mind complete with costume changes and emotional monologues, while his father remains perfectly serene in stonebound quiet. It's like living above a theater you never hear, because the walls are perfectly insulated. Mainstream scholarship confirms that ancient Greeks took dreams seriously. They recorded them, interpreted them, sometimes acted upon them. Temples of healing often incorporated dream incubation, which you'll encounter later in our journey. For now, It's enough to know that dreams were not dismissed as random nonsense. They were messages, puzzles, sometimes warnings. And yet, here in Hypnos Cave, they originate from silence. That's the key. The quiet is not emptiness, it's potential. You let your gaze drift across the imagined cavern. The Oneroi remain patient. Morpheus folds his wings. Phobiter watches the darker corners. Phantazos traces outlines in air. When night deepens, they will depart through unseen thresholds, slipping beneath eyelids across the world. Kings, shepherds, poets all will host these subtle visitors, but for now, the cave holds them, still waiting. The dreams retreat deeper into shadow for now, folding their wings in the quiet, and you remain seated against the cool stone. The cave feels less like a hiding place and more like a headquarters an understated operations center for something every human being experiences nightly. It makes you wonder how the mortals of ancient Greece prepared themselves for this visitation. If Hypnos rules sleep and the Oneroi craft dreams, what did ordinary people do at bedtime? Mainstream historical evidence tells us that daily life in ancient Greece followed the rhythm of the sun. Without electric light, most people rose at dawn and retired not long after sunset. Archaeological studies of domestic spaces' simple homes with central hearths suggest evenings were lit by oil lamps fueled with olive oil. The glow would have been soft and limited, nothing like the glare of modern screens. You can almost feel your eyes relaxing just thinking about it. Historians still argue whether segmented sleeping in two phases with a waking interval. In the middle of the night was common in the ancient Mediterranean world, as it was in later pre-industrial Europe. Some scholars propose that humans naturally wake for a quiet period before returning to rest. The textual evidence from Greece is inconclusive, but it's an intriguing possibility. Imagine waking at midnight, whispering a prayer to Hypnos, then drifting off again. There's no record of a massive temple complex dedicated solely to Hypnos, and that absence is a mainstream fact. Unlike Athena or Apollo, he didn't dominate city skylines, but sleep rituals still existed in subtler forms. People offered prayers to household gods, burned small offerings, and invoked protective deities before bed. Hypnos' presence would have been implied, woven into nightly routine rather than isolated in grand ceremony. You picture a modest Athenian home in the 5th century BCE. The family finishes a simple meal of bread. Olives, perhaps some fish. The oil lamp flickers. Someone mutters a short prayer for safe rest, maybe invoking Nyx to guard the household. Bedding is minimal. Woven mats, woolen blankets. Comfort is relative, but exhaustion makes it sufficient. A quirky tidbit preserved in some ancient sources suggests that certain Greeks believed placing specific herbs under a pillow could influence dreams. Laurel, associated with Apollo, might encourage prophetic visions. Poppy naturally invited deeper slumber. Whether this was widespread or localized is debated, but it reveals a practical intimacy with myth. Sleep wasn't passive, it was curated. Historians still argue whether dream interpretation was primarily religious or proto-scientific. Early thinkers like Aristotle wrote treatises such as On Dreams, attempting to explain them as natural phenomena rather than divine messages. That a mainstream historical detail, Aristotle proposed that dreams result from sensory impressions lingering after waking. Quite progressive for someone without a sleep lab. Yet popular belief in divine dream messages persisted alongside philosophical skepticism. You lean your head back and imagine the contrast. In one home, a philosopher dismisses a strange dream as indigestion. In another, a farmer interprets it as a sign from the gods. Hypnos oversees both without preference. Sleep is democratic. Interpretation is personal. In healing sanctuaries, though we'll explore them more fully later, ritual sleep, called incubation, involved lying down in sacred spaces to receive divine guidance through dreams. That practice shows how central sleep was to spiritual life. It wasn't just biological maintenance, it was potential revelation. The cave around you seems to hum gently, as if approving of these mortal efforts. No marble columns required, just darkness, intention, and surrender. There's also something charmingly human about bedtime vulnerability. Ancient Greeks feared nighttime dangerous thieves, spirits, illness. Prayers before sleep often asked for protection from harm. Night magnifies uncertainty. Perhaps that's another reason Hypnos prefers a cave. It embodies enclosure, safety, womb-like containment against the unknown. A fringe belief in certain local traditions held that whispering a loved one's name before sleep could draw their image into dreams. Romantic? Absolutely. Empirically verifiable. Questionable. Historians still argue whether such customs were common practice or later literary embellishment, but the idea fits the emotional logic of myth. You smile at the thought of a shepherd somewhere on a hillside, wrapping himself in a cloak beneath the stars, murmuring a quiet request for gentle dreams. No temple, no priest, just the open sky and the inevitability of fatigue. Mainstream evidence confirms that ancient Greek medical theory emphasized balance of humors of activity and rest. Sleep restored equilibrium. Too little sleep disrupted health. Too much signaled imbalance. Even without modern terminology, they recognized its necessity. The cave feels like the distilled essence of those nightly rituals. Strip away the hearth, the mat, the whispered prayer, and what remains is this: darkness, steady air, a soft scent of poppy, and the promise of release. You shift slightly, imagining oil lamps being extinguished across ancient villages. One by one, lights fade. Hypnos moves unseen, brushing foreheads with invisible wings. The Honoroi prepare their narratives. Lethe murmurs beyond the threshold. And you realize that while Olympus argues and heroes wage war, most of humanity is simply trying to sleep well. In that quiet effort, they are closest to this cave. The cave invites you to notice its shape, now not just its mood, but its architecture. Because silence doesn't happen by accident, it's built. You let your eyes trace the contours of the stone ceiling. Stalactites hang like patient teeth, though none drip. That detail matters. In Ovid's description of the dwelling of Hypnos, there are no creaking doors, no barking dogs, no crowing roosters, nothing that might disturb rest. It's a mainstream literary source for how this cave was imagined, acoustically perfect in its stillness. Caves in the Greek world were not rare curiosities. The limestone landscapes of regions like Crete and mainland Greece are riddled with them. Archaeology confirms that many caves were used for ritual purposes dedicated to nymphs, to Pan, even to Zeus in his infancy. A mainstream historical fact, caves held sacred significance long before anyone carved grand temples of marble. Historians still argue whether the mythic cave of Hypnos was inspired by a specific real grotto or whether it was an idealized composite of many sacred caves. No plaque has been found reading "Sleep God lives here," but the physical environment of Greece rocky cavernous, shadowed absolutely shaped mythic imagination. You run your hand along the imagined wall. It's cool, slightly damp, but not unpleasant. The temperature inside caves remains relatively stable year-round. Modern speleology confirms that caves often hover near the average annual surface temperature of their region. In other words, Hypnos chose climate control before it was fashionable. Olympus, by contrast, is subject to storm and glare. The cave is steady, there's something womb-like about it, enclosed, protective. Scholars of comparative mythology often point out that caves symbolize return to origin darkness, before birth, potential before emergence. Historians still argue whether Greek audiences consciously recognized that symbolism or simply absorbed it intuitively. Either way, the association between caves and transformation appears repeatedly in myth. You notice how the entrance curves inward rather than gaping wide. Light fades gradually instead of abruptly. That gradient matters. Sleep rarely slams the door. It dims the room. The architecture mirrors the process. A quirky fringe detail from later mythographers suggests that even echoes refuse to live here. That's poetic exaggeration. Of course, physics insists on reflection, but the point stands. This cave is designed to swallow sound. Imagine speaking and hearing nothing bounce back. Your voice dissolves into stone. It would feel almost sacred, or mildly unsettling, depending on how much you enjoy hearing yourself talk. Outside, the river Lethe glides past, but its sound enters softened, filtered through rock and ivy. The cave's mouth is partially veiled by trailing plants, another detail drawn from classical description. Vegetation acts as natural insulation. Hypnos sanctuary is layered: stone, plant, shadow. Mainstream archaeology shows that many Greek caves used for cult activity contained altars or small votive offerings, figurines, pottery shards, inscriptions. But Hypnos cave, as imagined in literature, lacks clutter. No statues, no gold. That absence is meaningful. Sleep does not require spectacle. Historians still argue whether the simplicity of the cave reflects a broader Greek appreciation for moderations. Refrisinor, whether it simply serves narrative aesthetics. But standing here in your mind, the minimalism feels intentional. You shift slightly and notice how the floor slopes gently downward, toward the interior, a subtle descent. In Greek cosmology, downward movement often signals proximity to the underworld. Hypnos dwells near the realm of Hades, yet not fully within it. The cave embodies that threshold, neither Olympus above nor Tartarus below, a middle place. The air barely moves, no drafts, no sudden chills. It's easy to see why ancient people associated caves with divine presence. The outside world changes constantly. Wind, sun, rain. Inside, time feels suspended. There's a gentle humor in imagining Olympus with its polished floors and elaborate thrones, while Hypnos opts for raw limestone. One god chooses gold leaf. Another chooses geological patience. Guess which one has better sleep hygiene? You close your eyes briefly and test the acoustics in your imagination. Even your breathing feels amplified yet contained. In such a space, the body's own rhythms become audible, the slow inhale, the softer exhale. It's almost meditative. Modern neuroscience tells us that quiet, dark environments encourage melatonin production, supporting healthy sleep cycles. The Greeks didn't know about hormones, but they knew about darkness and calm. The cave captures both perfectly. Historians still argue whether myths like this encode practical environmental wisdom, seek stable, dark, quiet places for rest or weather, or retrofitting biological understanding onto poetic imagery. It's likely a bit of both. Observation and imagination are rarely separate. You let your awareness drift upward to the stalactites again. They've formed over millennia, drop by drop, patient and slow. Sleep is like that too-built, nightly, incrementally restoring what the day erodes. The cave does not dazzle, it does not impress, it envelops. And as you settle more comfortably against its stone embrace, you realize that Hypnos didn't just prefer a quiet cave. He understood something fundamental. Silence needs structure. Darkness needs shelter. Rest needs walls that keep the world at bay. Olympus may glitter, but here, in carved rock and filtered shadow, sleep is perfectly at home. Beyond the cave's veiled entrance, the air cools further, and you sense a presence not heavy or ominous, but thin and deliberate, like a breath held just long enough to forget why you were holding it. This is the borderland where sleep brushes against something deeper. Not death exactly, just its quieter cousin. In Greek myth, Hypnos is the twin brother of Thanatos. That's a mainstream mythological fact, recorded in early sources like Hesiod's Theogony. They are both children of Nyx, born from darkness itself. Twins, which feels dramatic, but also poetic, because sleep and death do look suspiciously alike from a distance. You imagine them as opposites in temperament. Thanatos, solemn and efficient, perhaps carrying a faint scent of cold iron. Hypnos, gentler, trailing poppy petals and half-formed dreams. Yet, they share origins. They share silence. Historians still argue whether the Greeks truly feared sleep as a rehearsal for death, or whether that association is more philosophical than practical. Literary evidence often uses sleep as a metaphor for dying, but daily life suggests people viewed it as restorative, not terrifying. After all, you willingly lie down every night. That's a vote of confidence. In Homer's Iliad, Hypnos plays a crucial role in divine politics. He once lulls Zeus to sleep so that Hera can interfere in the Trojan War. That's a mainstream epic detail. The god of sleep successfully sedates the king of the gods, which is either impressive pharmacology or a testament to Zeus needing a nap. Probably both. You can't help smiling at the idea of cosmic power undone by drowsiness. Even supreme authority is vulnerable to eyelids growing heavy. It's oddly comforting, but the presence of Thanatos nearby shifts the tone slightly. In some vase paintings from classical Greece, Thanatos and Hypnos are depicted together, carrying the fallen hero Sarpedon from the battlefield. That's an archaeological fact. These twin figures appear in red figure pottery art. One handles sleep, the other finality, side by side. Historians still argue whether these artistic pairings suggest a deep theological unity or simply an aesthetic symmetry that appealed to ancient artists. Twins make good visual composition, but symbolism seeps through art whether intended or not. You feel it now, the delicate line between surrendering to rest and surrendering entirely. Sleep mimics death, stillness, closed eyes, slowed breath. Ancient observers recognized this resemblance long before modern medicine measured REM cycles. There is a fringe belief in later antiquity that those who appeared to die suddenly might actually be caught in a deep sleep, sent by the gods. Stories circulated of individuals awakening on funeral pyres, likely exaggerated or apocryphal, but telling. Fear of premature burial existed in many ancient cultures. Historians still argue how common such fears were in Greece, specifically. Yet the theme surfaces often enough to raise eyebrows. You shift uncomfortably at that thought, then relax. In this cave, death is not prowling, it's merely acknowledged. Hypnos doesn't chase you toward oblivion. He escorts you to temporary oblivion's harmless cousin. Ancient Greek philosophy grappled with the connection. Plato used sleep imagery when discussing the soul's separation from the body. Meanwhile, Aristotle tried to categorize sleep biologically. Two approaches, one metaphysical, one observational. Historians still argue whether Greek thinkers leaned more toward spiritual interpretations or rational inquiry when explaining the resemblance between sleep and death. The evidence suggests they did both of them simultaneously. Humans contain contradictions, so did the Greeks. You glance toward the cave's deeper interior. It does not descend into Tartarus. It stops at a comfortable midpoint. Hypnos territory brushes against the realm of Hades, but does not belong to it. That boundary is crucial. Sleep is reversible. Death in myth generally is not unless you're Orpheus, and even then, things get complicated. There's a soft humor in realizing that the Greeks personified even abstract states. Today, we blame stress or caffeine. They blamed a god with wings. Honestly, both explanations feel equally valid at 2 a.m. The air grows quieter still, and you notice how your own breathing slows in sympathy. This is the safe edge. The rehearsal that renews you. The daily practice of letting go. Mainstream modern science confirms that sleep is essential for cellular repair, memory consolidation, and immune function. The Greeks lacked EEG machines, but they understood instinctively that prolonged wakefulness leads to deterioration. Even warriors required rest between battles. Historians still argue whether ancient myths encoded practical wisdom about mortality, that sleep teaches acceptance of life's cycles, or whether we project existential philosophy onto simple narrative motifs. Yet standing here in imagination, the connection feels deliberate. You picture Hypnos and Thanatos not as rivals, but as co-workers. On different shifts, one clocks in nightly, gentle, and temporary. The other arrives only once. The cave belongs to the former. It is rehearsal without consequence. A pause, not an ending. And as the boundary hums softly around you, you sense why Hypnos prefers this quiet cave near his twin's domain. It reminds mortals without frightening them. That rest is a kind of trust. A daily leap into darkness with the expectation of return. You inhale slowly, exhale softer still, and remain exactly where sleep and life shake hands. A faint ripple of movement stirs near the cave's entrance, not loud enough to disturb, but distinct enough to notice. The air shifts like fabric brushing against stone. You don't see her directly at first, you feel her, the subtle gravity of night itself. Nyx stands somewhere beyond the curtain of ivy, and even in myth, she is described as ancient and formidable. In Hesiod's Theogony, she emerges from chaos at the dawn of creation, a primordial force, not a decorative afterthought. That's a mainstream mythological fact. Nyx predates the Olympian gods entirely. When Zeus rules, she already exists. You get the sense that even Zeus treats her carefully. In Homer's Iliad, there's a moment where Zeus refrains from punishing Hypnos, because Hypnos seeks refuge with Nyx, and Zeus does not wish to anger her. That's a well-documented epic episode. Imagine being so powerful that the kingdom gods pauses before upsetting you. That's not minor goddess energy. Historians still argue whether Nyx's prominence in early Greek cosmology reflects remnants of older pre-Olympian religious traditions. Some scholars suggest she may represent vestiges of earlier night cults or Indo-European mythic archetypes. Others argue she functions primarily as poetic personification. The debate hums on academic and unresolved. You picture her not as frightening, but vast like the sky at midnight, without city lights. A presence that does not demand attention because it already contains everything. Hypnos, her son, thrives within her domain. The cave is not isolated. It is nested inside her larger cloak. There's something almost tender in that relationship. Sleep sheltered by night. Darkness protecting darkness. Mainstream historical evidence shows that ancient Greeks marked the passage of night carefully. They divided it into watches, especially in military contexts. Soldiers on guard duty rotated through the dark hours. Night was structured, even when unseen. That practical awareness coexisted with mythic reverence. A quirky fringe tidbit from later Roman writers suggests that Nyx was sometimes imagined driving a chariot across the sky before dawn, scattering darkness like fabric. The imagery parallels that of her daughter, Hemrade, who follows behind. Whether this was widely believed or simply poetic flourish is debated. Historians still argue whether such chariot imagery reflects Near Eastern influences or purely Greek innovation. You lean against the stone and imagine Nyx passing overhead, her presence muffling the world. No spotlights, no notifications, just layered shadow. It makes modern blackout curtains feel embarrassingly inadequate. In Greek thought, night was not merely absence of light, it was active. It birthed dreams, death, sleep, fate. Nyx is also mother to the Moirai the Fates and to Nemesis. That genealogical web is recorded in Hesiod. Night gives rise to consequence and destiny. That S quite a resume. Historians still argue whether these genealogies represent literal belief systems or symbolic attempts to organize abstract concepts. Is Night Mother because darkness precedes events, or because humans naturally imagine causality through family trees? Either way, the metaphor is powerful. You sense how the cave's stillness feels deeper, knowing Nyx surrounds it. Hypnos is not hiding. He is at home within his mother's element. The quiet is not fragile, it is foundational. There's a gentle humor in imagining Olympus bustling with drama, while Nyx simply glides overhead, unimpressed. Gods argue, heroes boast, poets compose, epics and night arrives regardless. It's the ultimate I'll wait energy. Archaeologically, there is limited direct cult evidence for Nyx compared to major Olympians. That's a mainstream scholarly observation. She rarely had grand temples, yet her mythic importance far outweighs her physical worship footprint. Historians still argue whether her reverence was more literary than ritualistic. Perhaps she was too vast to confine within walls. You glance toward the cave entrance again. The ivy stirs faintly. Outside, the world dims under her steady watch. No fear accompanies its just containment in modern circadian science. Darkness triggers hormonal shifts, preparing the body for rest. The Greeks lacked that terminology, but they instinctively aligned activity with daylight and surrender with night. Nyx embodies that rhythm. She is the signal that the day's striving can cease. A fringe philosophical idea in later antiquity proposed that night encourages introspection because sensory distractions fade. Without light, the mind turns inward. Whether this was widely held or simply a reflective observation from isolated thinkers remains debated. But you can feel its truth here. You notice your thoughts growing quieter, less insistent. The cave doesn't need to hush you. Nyx already has. Hypnos prefers this place because it is enveloped in maternal vastness. The cave is not merely stone, it is a pocket within infinite dark, protected, undisturbed. And as you sit there, wrapped in layered shadow, you realize that sleep isn't just biological shutdown. It's participation in an ancient rhythm older than Olympus, older than argument, older even than gods with thunderbolts. Night arrives, and everything softens. The cave's quiet deepens until it feels textured, like velvet pressed gently against your ears. You begin to notice something subtle in the darkness. It's not movement exactly, but arrangement. The shadows aren't random. They seem layered, as though someone has carefully draped them in folds. In the ancient Greek imagination, darkness was not a void, but a substance. This is a pretty mainstream mythological idea. You have these primordial forces like Erebus, who literally embodied shadow itself. Erebus, the sibling of Nyx, the goddess of night, represents that deep gloom you find in caverns and the underworld. The mythical cave of Hypnos, the god of sleep, sits comfortably in this lineage of textured, substantial darkness. You can almost feel it now, can't you? How the absence of light becomes its own presence. It's not threatening, it's not oppressive, it's just thick enough to cradle your thoughts. Historians still argue about this. But did early Greek audiences perceive these primordial deities as literal beings, Or were they just poetic frameworks for explaining natural phenomena? Did they picture Erebus as a conscious entity walking around, or was he simply a name for shadow? The debate is still unresolved, and maybe that ambiguity is fitting. After all, darkness itself resists any precise definition. Let's trace the curve of the cave wall with our eyes again. The light from the entrance barely reaches here. What does arrive is diffused, softened into a gray haze. This gradual fading mirrors what happens when you close your eyes. The ancient Greeks didn't have blackout blinds, but they knew how to value shade. In fact, mainstream archaeological evidence confirms that many Greek homes were built with small windows and thick walls, which naturally limited how much light could get in. This practical architecture also doubled as sleep-friendly design. Whether that was intentional or just a structural necessity is debated, but the effect was the same. Darkness encouraged rest. There's also a quirky fringe belief, preserved in some later magical papyri, that suggests certain incantations could thicken darkness to protect sleepers from intrusive spirits. Historians are still arguing whether such spells reflect widespread superstition or just some niche esoteric practice. Either way, the metaphor is telling. Darkness is a shield, not an enemy. Let your breathing slow down for a moment. Imagine that darkness settling around you like layered cloth. Each layer filters out a distraction. First, the bright noise of the day fades away. Then, the sound of conversations. Then, your own stray thoughts. Until all that remains is simply your breath and your heartbeat. There's a soft humor in realizing how much modern life fights this very process. We install nightlights, glowing clocks, blinking Ruderzall, these tiny rebellions against the authority of Nyx. If Hypnos had Wi-Fi, he would probably unplug it. The cave teaches something quiet, but radical. Darkness doesn't need a justification. It simply is. Think about Greek theater. Performances took place in daylight, but many festivals honored deities through nocturnal rituals. Scholars note that these night ceremonies often emphasized mystery and transformation, and historians are still arguing whether these rites influenced the mythic depictions of dark spaces like Hypnos Cave. It's plausible that this lived ritual experience shaped the imagery of their stories. Imagine a devotee stepping into a sacred grotto at dusk, their oil lamp extinguished, their senses recalibrating. The mind begins to wander. Without constant visual input, the imagination expands. Maybe that SY dreams feel so much more vivid than our daytime thoughts. They grow in fertile shadow. Erebus, Nyx, Hypnos are all woven into this fabric. Darkness births sleep, which births dreams. It's a chain reaction that begins with simply closing your eyes. There's also a practical biological truth here. Modern chronobiology confirms that exposure to artificial light suppresses our production of melatonin. The Greeks didn't know the word melatonin, but they understood that firelight is different from sunlight. Oil lamps emit a much softer glow. When they were extinguished, night could fully claim the room. Historians still argue whether ancient Mediterranean populations experienced deeper, more regular sleep cycles than modern societies do. It's tempting to romanticize pre-electric life, but insomnia likely existed back then too. Human worry did not wait for smartphones to be invented. Still, the environmental conditions were definitely more favorable to darkness. If you shift slightly in this cave, it answers with silence. There's no echo, no drip of water, just a sustained, deep hush. The shadows seem almost protective, as though they're insulating you from the sharper edges of existence. A fringe poetic idea from later. Neoplatonic thinkers proposed that darkness represents the soul S returned to unity before differentiation. Historians are still debating how widespread these metaphysical interpretations were outside of philosophical circles. But sitting here, the concept feels less abstract. In darkness, distinctions blur, edges soften. You feel less separate from your surroundings, and that, perhaps, is part of why Hypnos prefers his cave. The cave doesn't put a spotlight on him. It absorbs him. Sleep is not a performance. It is a surrender without an audience. Go ahead and close your eyes fully now. Even in your imagination, the shift is noticeable. The last trace of gray dissolves. What remains? You realize that darkness is not empty at all. It is structured, ancient, and deeply patient. It has hosted God's rituals, philosophical debates, and countless mortal nights. And here, in this layered shadow, Hypnos rests easily, because darkness, when you understand it, is not something to fear, it is something that holds you. Thanks for joining me on this journey into the dark. If you enjoyed this, feel free to like and subscribe for more explorations like this one. See you next time. A faint sweetness lingers in the air now, subtle but unmistakable, not cloying, not overpowering, just enough to soften the edges of thought. You notice it drifting near the cave floor, brushing against the stone like a whisper of summer fields. Poppies, of course. In classical art and literature, Hypnos is often depicted holding poppies or a horn dripping with their essence. That's a mainstream mythological detail. The poppy, particularly the opium poppy, was known in the ancient Mediterranean world for its sedative properties. Archaeological evidence confirms that opium was cultivated and traded in the region as early as the Bronze Age. So when the Greeks associated sleep with poppies, they weren't being metaphorical alone, they were observant. You imagine bright red flowers growing just outside the cave's entrance, their delicate petals surprisingly bold against the limestone. The seeds contain compounds capable of dulling pain and inducing drowsiness. Ancient physicians, including followers of Hippocrates, documented plant-based remedies. While Hippocratic texts are cautious about dosage, they demonstrate awareness of narcotic plants. That's a well-established historical fact. Historians still argue whether the mythic imagery of Hypnos carrying poppies reflects widespread medicinal knowledge or elite literary symbolism. Did everyday farmers consciously connect the flower with divine sleep, or was that association shaped by poets and physicians? The line between folklore and pharmacology blurs easily. You crouch near the cave mouth and brush imaginary fingers over a blossom. It's fragile, almost absurdly delicate for something that can nudge consciousness toward oblivion. There's a quiet irony there. Power disguised as softness. A quirky fringe tidbit suggests that some ancient cultures believed poppies grew where fallen warriors' blood touched the earth, linking them symbolically to both sleep and death. While more prominent in later European folklore, echoes of that imagery appear in Mediterranean storytelling. Historians still debate how much of that symbolism can be traced directly to early Greek myth versus later Romantic reinterpretation. You inhale slowly. The scent is faint, but grounding, not intoxicating, just calming. Hypnos doesn't overwhelm. He persuades. In Greek iconography, poppies also appear with Demeter, goddess of grain and harvest. That's a mainstream artistic observation. Some scholars interpret this as symbolic overlap between fertility, cycles, and rest. Crops grow, fields lie fallow, seasons turn. Sleep participates in that agricultural rhythm. Historians still argue whether these shared symbols indicate theological connections or simply artistic convenience. You can almost hear a distant rustle of grain fields under night wind. The cave is not isolated from the living world. It's fed by plants, rivers, soil. Even sleep depends on nourishment and seasonal cycles. There's gentle humor in imagining ancient physicians trying to measure the correct amount of poppy extract without modern scales. Just a pinch, someone probably said, which is comforting until you realize ancient pinches may have varied wildly. Luckily, Hypnos handles dosage better than most. Mainstream medical papyri and Greek texts confirm that opium preparations were used cautiously for pain relief and sedation. However, the Greeks did not fully understand addiction or long-term effects as modern medicine does. Historians still argue about how widespread opium use truly was in everyday Greek life versus controlled medicinal contexts. Evidence suggests it was present, but not necessarily rampant. Back in the cave, the poppies serve more as symbol than substance. They line the entrance like quiet guardians, red by day, nearly black at night. Their presence reinforces Hypnos' preference for natural calm over divine spectacle. You settle again against the stone, the sweetness lingers, mixing with mineral coolness. It's enough to signal safety without dulling awareness entirely. In later Roman adaptations, Hypnosunda, the name Somnos retains the poppy imagery. That continuity suggests the association was deeply rooted. Symbols endure when they resonate. Historians still argue whether mythic plant symbolism functioned as early mnemonic devices' visual cues to remember medicinal properties. It's possible that linking poppies to a sleep god reinforced knowledge about their effects. Or perhaps humans simply enjoy giving flowers dramatic backstories. Both explanations feel plausible. You watch, as the faint breeze at the cave mouth causes a few petals to tremble. They do not fall, they simply sway, patient and unhurried. There's something profoundly gentle about Hypnos, choosing flowers instead of weapons. No thunderbolts, no dents, just blossoms in a quiet cave. Power expressed through softness, and as the sweet air settles around you, thoughts loosen slightly at the edges. Not vanishing, just becoming less rigid. Sleep approaches not like an invasion, but like pollen drifting on night air. Unseen, unforced, unmistakable. The sweetness of poppies lingers. But now your attention shifts to the faint sound beyond the kiva low, steady current moving with patient indifference. Not loud enough to intrude, just present enough to anchor the silence. The river Lethe glides past. In Greek mythology, Lethe is one of the rivers of the underworld, associated with forgetfulness. Souls who drink from it lose memory of their previous lives before reincarnation. That's a mainstream mythological detail preserved in sources describing the realm of Hades. The connection between sleep and forgetting is not subtle, it's almost poetic symmetry. You step closer to the cave's edge, where the river's surface reflects nothing but shadow. No stars, no moon, just dark glass. The water moves slowly, deliberately, as if careful not to disturb the cave's occupant. Historians still argue whether Leithaia originally symbolized literal afterlife belief, or whether it represented psychological processes for getting pain, shedding identity, resetting the mind. Ancient Greek religion blended cosmology and metaphor so seamlessly that separating them is tricky business. Was Lethe a real river in their imagined geography, or a philosophical statement about memory? Possibly both. There's a gentle humor in imagining your own nightly brush with Lethe. Every time you wake up and can't remember what you dreamed 5 minutes ago, perhaps you've taken a small sip. Nothing dramatic, just enough to erase the bizarre subplot involving talking goats and overdue taxes. Hypnos spares you the details. Mainstream historical texts, including Plato's myth of Er, describe souls drinking from Lethe before returning to mortal life. That's a well-documented philosophical narrative. Plato uses the river as a device to explore memory and moral responsibility. Forgetting becomes necessary for rebirth. You kneel by the water in imagination and dip your fingers in. It's cool, but not icy. The surface ripples once and smooths itself instantly. There is something merciful about selective forgetting. Without it, every embarrassment, every loss, every worry would accumulate unbearably. Sleep performs a gentler version of that reset nightly. Historians still argue whether the Greeks believed memory resided in the soul or the body. Philosophical schools differed sharply. Some proposed that learning was recollection of eternal truths. Others emphasized sensory experience. Lethe complicates that discussion. If knowledge can be erased, what remains essential? The debate is ongoing in scholarly circles. You notice how the river's pace matches your breathing. Slow in, slow out. Its steady motion contrasts with the chaotic rush of daily life. The cave's stillness pairs with the river's quiet flow. One holds you, the other carries things away. There's also a fringe Orphic tradition, suggesting that initiates were instructed to avoid drinking from Lethe and instead seek the waters of Mnemosyne memory to retain knowledge after death. Historians still debate how widespread Orphic practices were and how literally such instructions were interpreted. But the contrast is fascinating. Forgetfulness versus remembrance. In everyday Greek life, memory was vital. Oral tradition preserved epic poetry like Homer's works for generations before being written down. Mnemosyne, mother of the muses, embodied that cultural priority. Forgetting could be both mercy and loss. You watch Lethe curve past the cave, unhurried. It does not demand participation. It simply exists as an option. Hypnos resides near it, not because he enforces oblivion, but because sleep resembles a small rehearsal of forgetting. You release the day's details. You loosen your grip on identity. Modern neuroscience confirms that sleep plays a crucial role in memory consolidations, strengthening some neural pathways while pruning others. That's a mainstream scientific fact. Interestingly, forgetting is not failure, it's function. The brain discards unnecessary information to preserve clarity. Lethe would approve. Historians still argue whether ancient mythmakers intuitively recognize this cognitive reset or whether the symbolic overlap is coincidental. It's impossible to prove, but humans have always noticed that morning brings perspective. Some burdens feel lighter after rest. You cup imaginary water in your palm and let it slip back into the current. No dramatic amnesia, just the suggestion of release, there as a soft joke hidden in the whole arrangement. The god of sleep lives beside the river of forgetfulness, yet people still insist on doom-scrolling before bed. Hypnos must sigh frequently. The river continues its patient path, smoothing sharp memories into distant echoes, not erased, just softened. You lean back against the stone once more. The cave behind you, Lethe beside you, darkness above you. In this borderland, forgetting is not failure, it is kindness. And as the steady current hums its low lullaby, you feel certain that Hypnos prefers this quiet cave, because here, even memory knows when to rest. The river's hush fades gently into the background again, and something else replaces it, not sound, but presence. A flicker at the edge of perception, shapes forming and dissolving in the dim air of the cave. The Onaroi are near. In Greek mythology, the Onaroi are the personified spirits of dreams, children of That's a mainstream mythological tradition, recorded in sources like Hesiod, and later expanded by Roman poets. Among them are figures such as Morpheus, who shapes human forms in dreams, Phobetor, who sends animal visions, and Phantasos, who crafts inanimate dream imagery. You begin to sense how each operates. Morpheus moves closest to you, subtle and skilled. In later Roman literature, particularly in Ovid's Metamorphoses, Morpheus is described as the most adept at mimicking human appearance and speech. That's a mainstream literary fact. He can replicate gestures, voices, even emotional nuance. If you've ever dreamed of a conversation so convincing you woke up slightly confused, you've met his handiwork. Historians still argue whether the detailed hierarchy of dream spirits was widely believed in Greek religion, or primarily a poetic invention elaborated by later authors. Early Greek texts mention dream spirits more vaguely, while Roman writers systematized them. The debate lingers in academic circles. You watch as one shadow elongates into a familiar face just for a second, before dissolving again. Morpheus practicing, perhaps. There's something almost theatrical about it, like backstage rehearsals in dim light. Then comes Phobetor, associated with animals and monstrous shapes. His presence feels less steady, more unpredictable. Mainstream mythological sources suggest he specialized in dreams involving beasts. If you've ever been chased in a dream by something with too many legs or not enough logic, you can thank him. There's a gentle humor in imagining Phobetor taking creative liberties. What if the wolf also has wings? He muses, apparently unconcerned with biological plausibility. Dreams rarely consult zoology textbooks. Phantasos, meanwhile, shapes, landscapes, and objects mountains, bending, cities floating, doors leading nowhere. His artistry turns physical reality elastic. Historians still argue whether these named figures reflect actual cult worship or simply literary personification of different dream types. Archaeological evidence for dedicated Onaroi shrines is sparse, but as narrative devices, they endure beautifully. You feel the air ripple slightly as multiple dream forms hover, waiting for Hypnos' quiet signal. The cave becomes a staging ground, not chaotic organized. There's rhythm to it. Mainstream Greek belief acknowledged dreams as meaningful experiences. In Homer's Odyssey, dreams are described as passing through to gates one of horn, one of ivory. True dreams come through horn, false ones through ivory. That's a well-known epic detail. Scholars still argue whether this metaphor reflects early attempts to categorize reliable versus deceptive visions. You glance toward the cave entrance, half expecting to see those symbolic gates. Instead, there's just ivy and shadow. The gates are conceptual. The Onaroi choose their routes carefully. Their S, also a fringe philosophical tradition, suggesting that dreams provide access to hidden truths because the rational mind loosens its grip during sleep. Later thinkers, especially in Hellenistic schools, debated whether dreams were divine messages, psychological residue, or random sensory echoes. Historians still argue how seriously everyday Greeks treated prophetic dreams outside formal religious contexts. You shift slightly, aware that one of these spirits may be observing you now, not menacing, curious. They are craftsmen, after all, dreamweavers with portfolios. Modern sleep science identifies REM sleep as the stage most associated with vivid dreaming. That's a mainstream scientific fact. During REM, brain activity resembles wakefulness. yet the body remains largely paralyzed. The Greeks didn't know the term REM, but they certainly noticed the strangeness of dreams. You imagine Hypnos seated calmly, overseeing the onaroi, like a quiet director before a performance. No shouting, no dramatic cues, just a gentle nod. Their S, a soft joke hidden in the arrangement. The god of sleep runs perhaps the most imaginative department in the cosmos. Yet he chooses to live in a cave with zero decor. Clearly, he saves all aesthetic energy for dreams. Minimalist office, maximalist imagination. The shadows around you swirl once more, forming brief flashes of faces, forests, forgotten hallways. Then they settle, patient and ready. Historians still argue whether ancient dream interpretation practices influenced early psychological thought. While Freud and Jung are much later figures, the impulse to decode dreams stretches back millennia. The onaroi would likely smirk at how seriously humans take their night productions. You rest your head back against the stone again, feeling the cave steady beneath you. Hypnos' quiet presence reassures the dream spirits into order. They wait, and when sleep deepens, they will move through horn, through ivory, through pathways only darkness understands. Have you ever pulled an all-nighter and felt like a zombie the next day? Or maybe you just consistently get a few hours less sleep than you should, and you feel that constant brain fog. We often treat sleep like a luxury, something we can cut back on when we're busy. But what if I told you that sleep is one of the most powerful things you can do for your health, performance, and well-being? It's not just about resting your body. It's a critical period where your brain and body are incredibly active, performing essential maintenance that keeps you running at 100%. Stick around, because today we're rediving deep into the science of sleep and uncovering what really happens to your body when the lights go out. You'll be amazed at how much is going on while you're dreaming. Let's start with the brain. Think of your brain like a super busy city that never truly shuts down. During the day, it's buzzing with activity, learning, thinking, feeling. All this activity creates metabolic byproducts, kind of like cellular trash. One of these key byproducts is a chemical called adenosine. As adenosine builds up throughout the day, it increases your sleep pressure, making you feel more and more tired. It's your brain's natural way of telling you, hey, it's time to power down. When you finally go to sleep, your brain kicks into high gear with its cleaning crew. There's a fascinating system called the glymphatic system, which is way more active during sleep. It uses cerebrospinal fluid to flush out all those waste products, including adenosine and another protein called beta-amyloid, which has been linked to Alzheimer's disease. So, getting enough quality sleep is literally like giving your brain a deep clean every single night. It's essential for keeping your mind sharp and healthy long term. But the brain's nightly work doesn't stop with cleaning. Sleep is absolutely crucial for memory and learning. You know how you study hard for an exam or practice a new skill? Well, a lot of the magic happens while you're asleep. During sleep, your brain consolidates memories, transferring them from your short-term memory, which is like a temporary holding folder, to your long-term memory, which is like a permanent filing cabinet. This process strengthens the neural connections related to what you've learned, making it easier to recall that information later. It's not just about facts and figures either. This applies to motor skills too. Ever struggled with a piece of music or a new dance move, only to find it's suddenly easier the next morning? That's your brain practicing and reinforcing those pathways while you were dreaming. So, if you want to learn faster and remember more, prioritizing sleep is a non-negotiable strategy. Now, let's talk about what happens to the rest of your body. Your immune system gets a major boost during sleep. While you're resting, your body produces and releases proteins called cytokines. Some of these cytokines are essential for fighting off infections and inflammation. When you don't get enough sleep, your body produces fewer of these protective cytokines, and your infection-fighting antibodies and cells are reduced. This is why you're more likely to catch a cold or the flu when you're sleep-deprived. Think of it this way: your immune system is your body's army, and sleep is when it builds its weapons and trains its soldiers. Skimping on sleep is like sending your army into battle unprepared. So, if you want to stay healthy and resilient, especially during cold and flu season, make sure you're getting your 7 to 9 hours of shut-eye. Sleep also plays a huge role in regulating your hormones, which are the chemical messengers that control almost every function in your body. Let's look at appetite. Two key hormones here are ghrelin and leptin. Ghrelin is the go hormone that tells you when you're hungry. Leptin is the stop hormone. It tells you when you're full. When you're sleep deprived, your body produces more ghrelin and less leptin. This means you feel hungrier and less satisfied after you eat, which often leads to overeating and craving high-calorie, sugary foods. It's a double whammy for weight management. Furthermore, lack of sleep can impact your insulin sensitivity. Insulin is the hormone that helps your cells use glucose for energy. Poor sleep can make your cells more resistant to insulin, which over time can increase your risk for type 2 diabetes. So, a good night's sleep is fundamental for maintaining a healthy metabolism and body weight. And what about your physical performance and recovery? If you're into fitness or sports, listen up. Sleep is when your body does most of its repair work. During deep sleep, your body releases growth hormone, which is vital for repairing and building muscle tissue after a workout. It also helps in repairing cellular damage throughout your body. Without enough sleep, this recovery process is stunted. You won't get the full benefits of your training. Your muscles will be sorer for longer, and your risk of injury goes up. Your energy levels, reaction time, and coordination are also significantly worse when you're tired. So, whether you're a professional athlete or just someone who enjoys hitting the gym, sleep is your ultimate recovery tool. It's just as important as your workout and your nutrition. The effects of sleep deprivation don't just stop at the physical level. They have a massive impact on your mental and emotional health. You've probably noticed that you're more irritable, moody, and easily stressed after a bad night's sleep. That's because the amygdala, your brain's emotional center, becomes much more reactive when you're tired. At the same time, the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for logical thinking and impulse control, becomes less active. This combination means you're more likely to have strong emotional reactions without the usual rational filter to keep them in check. It's a recipe for anxiety, stress, and conflict. Chronic sleep deprivation is strongly linked to a higher risk of developing mood disorders like depression and anxiety. If you are struggling with your mental health, please know that help is available. Talking to a professional can make a world of difference, and we'll put some resources in the description below. Taking care of your sleep is a powerful first step in taking care of your mind. So, how can you improve your sleep? The key is good sleep hygiene. First, consistency is king. Try to go to bed and wake up at the same time every day, even on weekends. This helps regulate your body's internal clock, or circadian rhythm. Second, create a relaxing bedtime routine. This could be reading a book, taking a warm bath, listening to calm music, or doing some light stretching. The goal is to signal to your brain and body that it's time to wind down. Third, optimize your sleep environment. Your bedroom should be dark, quiet, and cool. Blackout curtains, earplugs, or a white noise machine can be game changers. And a big one in our modern world, avoid screens for at least an hour before bed. The blue light emitted from phones, tablets, and computers suppresses the production of melatonin, the hormone that makes you sleepy. Try charging your phone across the room so you're not tempted to scroll. Let's also touch on what you eat and drink. Avoid large meals, caffeine, and alcohol close to bedtime. Caffeine is a stimulant, and its effects can last for hours, making it harder to fall asleep. While alcohol might make you feel drowsy initially, it actually disrupts your sleep later in the night, particularly REM sleep, which is crucial for memory and mood. A light, healthy snack is fine if you're hungry, but a heavy meal can cause indigestion that keeps you awake. Regular exercise during the day can also promote better sleep at night, but try to avoid intense workouts right before bed, as that can be too stimulating for some people. It's all about creating the right conditions for your body to do what it naturally wants to do, which is rest and recharge. It's an active, dynamic process that is fundamental to every aspect of your health. From cleaning your brain and consolidating memories to strengthening your immune system, regulating your hormones, and repairing your body. Sleep is the foundation upon which a healthy life is built. By understanding what's happening while you're unconscious, you can start to appreciate just how important it is to protect your sleep time. It's not about being lazy, it's about being smart and investing in your long-term physical and mental well-being. So tonight, when you turn off the lights, remember all the incredible work your body is about to do. Give it the time it needs to perform its nightly magic. Thanks so much for watching and learning about the incredible power of sleep with me today. I hope this gives you a new appreciation for your nightly rest. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more content on health and science. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What S1 change you are going to make to improve your sleep hygiene? Sweet dreams, and see you in the next video. The body settles, the breath evens out, and now your thoughts begin to loosen their grip on the sharp edges of the day. The cave grows less like a location and more like a state of mind. You notice how ideas drift in without fully forming, as though someone has lowered the brightness on your internal screen. Ancient Greek thinkers were deeply curious about this transition from waking logic to dreamlike fluidity. Aristotle wrote not only on sleep and sleeplessness, but also on dreams, attempting to explain dreams as residual sensory impressions. That's a mainstream historical fact. He argued that dreams are not divine messages, but echoes of waking experiences processed internally, a surprisingly modern take for someone working without brain scans. Historians still argue whether Aristotle's views were widely accepted in his time, or whether popular belief continued to favor divine explanations. Greek culture rarely moved in a single intellectual direction. Rational inquiry and religious tradition coexisted comfortably. You notice how your own mind behaves as you sit here. A memory surfaces, a fragment of conversation, then dissolves before you can examine it closely. The onaroi, perhaps, warming up backstage. In Homeric epics, dreams are often sent by gods with deliberate intent. In the Iliad, a deceptive dream is dispatched to Agamemnon to influence his decisions. That's a mainstream literary episode. Dreams can guide, mislead, warn. They are not neutral in early myth, they are tools. Yet later, philosophical schools questioned this. Some thinkers proposed that dreams reflect bodily states in digestion, fever, imbalance. Historians still argue how much of this naturalistic explanation filtered down into everyday understanding. Did the average Greek blame spicy lentils or a mischievous god? Possibly both, depending on the night. You feel your awareness flicker, not fully asleep, not fully alert. The cave's darkness seems to breathe with you. There's a quiet humor in realizing that modern people still debate dreams in similar ways. Some see them as psychological processing, others as spiritual insight. Replace hypnos with subconscious, and the conversation barely changes. Humanity may update vocabulary, but mystery persists. In Greek healing, sanctuaries, particularly those dedicated to Asclepius patients, practiced dream incubation. That's a mainstream historical fact, supported by archaeological inscriptions. Individuals would sleep within the sanctuary, hoping the god would appear in a dream to prescribe treatment. Stone tablets record reported cures and visions. Sleep was diagnostic. Historians still argue whether these recorded cures reflect psychosomatic healing, placebo effects, or genuine medical interventions guided by priests. The inscriptions are fascinating but not clinically controlled studies. Still, they demonstrate that dreams were taken seriously, ritualized, awaited. You imagine lying in such a sanctuary on a simple pallet, surrounded by others, seeking relief. The anticipation itself might shape the dream. Expectation is powerful. Back in the cave, Hypnos does not promise prophecy. He promises rest. The oneroi handle the narratives, but the primary gift is release from linear thought. Modern cognitive science suggests that during REM sleep, the brain integrates emotional experiences, often softening the intensity of distressing memories. That's a mainstream scientific finding. Sleep does not erase pain, but it can recalibrate it. Lethe's gentler cousin at work again. Historians still argue whether ancient observers recognized this emotional processing aspect of dreams or simply interpreted them symbolically. Without controlled experiments, they relied on patterns and stories, and patterns they certainly noticed. You allow another thought to drift through. It doesn't demand resolution. It simply passes, like Lethe's current. There's something profoundly humbling about this mental shift. During the day, you pride yourself on clarity, productivity, decisive logic. At night, you surrender to images stitched together by unseen hands. Hypnos levels intellectual hierarchies effortlessly. Philosopher and shepherd alike dream in fragments. A fringe philosophical idea from later antiquity suggested that dreams reveal truths precisely because the rational mind loosens control. Historians still debate how influential that idea was outside small intellectual circles, but you can feel the appeal. When vigilance fades, imagination blooms. The cave holds steady around you. No distractions, no bright interruptions, just the slow unraveling of conscious structure. You sense now why Hypnos prefers this place not merely for silence, but for the way silence encourages mental drift. Olympus would be too loud, too argumentative. The cave invites thought to soften, to blur at the edges. Your breathing grows deeper. Ideas become lighter. And in the hush between one coherent thought and the next, you begin to understand that sleep is not an absence of mind. It is a different kind of thinking entirely. The drift continues, but instead of sinking fully under, you hover in that peculiar in-between the place where thoughts still form sentences, yet logic has loosened its tie. The cave seems to widen subtly, not physically, but perceptually. Space stretches when you stop measuring it. You begin to sense that Hypnos' quiet preference for this cave isn't only about stillness or darkness. It's about distance, not miles, but remove. A retreat from Olympus, from argument, from the clang of divine ego. In Greek mythology, the Olympian gods were famously dramatic. Feasts, rivalries, punishments, jealousies, less a serene council, and more a celestial group chat with thunderbolts. Zeus presides, lightning in hand, Hera plots. Athena strategizes. That's mainstream mythological characterization drawn from Homer and Hesiod. Olympus is lively, loud. Even historians still argue whether Mount Olympus was ever considered a literal divine residence, or primarily symbolic. The mountain itself, the highest in Greece, certainly inspired awe. Archaeological evidence shows no permanent ancient temple at its summit, suggesting its sanctity was more mythic than infrastructural. But symbolically, it stood for divine hierarchy and spectacle. You compare that with the cave-hidden, modest, acoustically hushed, Hypnos deliberately resides away from divine politics. In the Iliad, when he risks Zeus' anger by aiding Hera, he flees not to Olympus, but to Nyx for protection. That's a mainstream literary moment. Even the god of sleep avoids direct confrontation when possible. Relatable, honestly. There's gentle humor in imagining Olympus hosting a noisy banquet, while Hypnos quietly slips out the back, muttering something about needing some fresh cave air. Not every god thrives in drama. The cave represents strategic withdrawal. Ancient Greek culture valued moderation, so seen as a virtue, balance between excess and deficiency. Historians still argue whether this ethical ideal permeated daily behavior or functioned primarily as philosophical aspiration. But the concept exists prominently in texts. Hypnos embodies it naturally. He doesn't dominate, he tempers. You notice how your own mind craves that removal. Distance from noise, from performance. Even in imagination, the cave feels like relief from endless stimulation. In classical Athens, public life was vibrant debates. In the agora, theatrical performances, political assemblies. That's a mainstream historical reality. Civic participation was active and often loud. The contrast between daytime civic engagement and nighttime retreat would have been stark. Sleep became a daily exile from public identity. Historians still argue how exhausting Athenian civic life truly was for ordinary citizens. Participation varied by status and gender, of course, but for those involved, the rhythm of debate and decision-making required periodic withdrawal. Hypnos' cave could be read as the mythic counterpart to that need. You let your shoulders sink further. In this space, no one expects arguments, achievements, or defenses. You are not required to win anything. There's also a fringe philosophical interpretation suggesting that Hypnos' residence near the underworld, but outside. Olympus symbolizes liminality, a state between realms. Historians still debate how consciously ancient audiences interpreted spatial metaphors this way. But the geography of myth often mirrors psychological states. The cave is not anti-Olympus. It's simply alternative. Modern psychology speaks of sensory deprivation reducing stress responses. That's a mainstream finding. Lower stimulus environments can calm the nervous system. Hypnos understood this instinctively, though whether through divine wisdom or geological luck is up for debate. You imagine Olympus glowing faintly in the distance, its halls echoing with divine disputes. Meanwhile, here in shadow, quiet reigns without competition. There's something almost rebellious about choosing simplicity over grandeur. No throne, no golden armor, just stone, river, poppies, darkness. Historians still argue whether lesser gods like Hypnos were ever worshipped independently in structured cults or whether their presence functioned, primarily within broader mythological frameworks. Evidence suggests limited standalone worship compared to major Olympians, yet his influence was universal. Every mortal required him nightly. You smile faintly at the irony. The least ostentatious god wields the most consistent authority. No one outruns sleep. Not kings, not heroes, not philosophers. Mid-argument, the cave's stillness grows heavier, but not oppressive, protective. You feel removed not only from Olympus, but from urgency itself. And in that remove, you begin to understand that Hypnos prefers this quiet cave because rest cannot coexist with spectacle. Silence requires stepping away. Distance creates depth, and here, far from thunder and applause, sleep does its most faithful work. Distance softens into something warmer, not just removal from Olympus, but gentle closeness to humanity. The cave does not isolate Hypnos from mortals. It makes him accessible. No golden gates, no towering steps, just a shaded entrance and a river murmuring nearby. You begin to realize that sleep is the most democratic experience in Greek mythology. While Zeus may command storms and Poseidon may churn oceans, neither can deny the necessity of rest. That's a mainstream narrative truth visible throughout epic literature. Gods themselves sleep. Even Zeus is famously lulled into slumber in the Iliad. Power yields to eyelids. Historians still argue whether Greek audiences interpreted divine sleep literally or symbolically. Did they imagine the gods physically unconscious, or was sleep a poetic shorthand for inattention? The texts leave room for both interpretations, but the effect is clear. Sleep levels hierarchy. You picture an Athenian potter finishing his work at dusk. Clay under his fingernails, shoulders aching. He lies down on a woven mat. Somewhere in Sparta, a soldier does the same. Somewhere on a ship crossing the Aegean, a sailor curls against a coil of rope. Different lives, same surrender. Hypnos visits them all without preference. That universality is reflected in ancient Greek funerary inscriptions that refer to death as eternal sleep. It's a mainstream epigraphic observation. Many grave markers employ sleep imagery. The metaphor softened mortality's finality. Historians still argue whether this language reflects genuine comfort or simply poetic convention, but the recurrence is striking. You notice how the cave feels less like a divine office and more like a resting place anyone could stumble into. No guards, no ceremony. There's gentle humor in realizing that while other gods required elaborate sacrifices, bulls, incense, festivals, Hypnos offering is simply cooperation. Close your eyes. That's it, minimalist worship at its finest. In classical Greek households, bedtime rituals were modest but meaningful. Families might offer a brief prayer to household gods or to protective deities. Archaeological evidence confirms the presence of small domestic altars in many homes. Sleep was framed as both biological necessity and spiritual vulnerability. Historians still argue how consistently such practices were observed across regions and social classes. Documentation is uneven, but the pattern suggests that night was not entered casually. It was acknowledged. You feel the cave's accessibility as a quiet invitation. No thunder to intimidate you, no blazing radiance to blind you, just steady dimness. In myth, Hypnos is described as gentle, sometimes winged, moving silently among mortals. That's a mainstream literary detail found in Homeric descriptions. His approach is not violent or dramatic. He does not conquer, he persuades. Modern sleep research confirms that stress hormones inhibit restful sleep. Calm environments promote it. That's a mainstream scientific fact. Hypnos' cave is the mythological embodiment of ideal sleep hygiene. Cool, dark, quiet, removed from conflict. Historians still argue whether ancient Greeks conceptualized environmental factors as strongly influencing sleep quality, or whether such insights were intuitive rather than formalized. Regardless, the lived experience would have reinforced the connection. You imagine someone in ancient Corinth whispering a brief appeal before bed, not for wealth, not for victory, just for uninterrupted rest. It's such a small request, yet profoundly human. There's also a fringe anecdote preserved in later commentary that some individuals attributed vivid, comforting dreams to Hypnos' particular favor. Whether these attributions were common or rare is debated, but it reveals a relational quality sleep, not as random occurrence, but as gift. The cave holds that feeling, gift, not obligation. You stretch out fully now, the stone beneath you surprisingly accommodating. The darkness does not press, it supports. And in that support, you sense why Hypnos chose this place. Not for grandeur, not for isolation from mortals, but for proximity to their most universal experience. Every human being, from mythic hero to unnamed laborer, eventually steps into the same quiet state. No crown required, no argument necessary, just the simple shared surrender to rest. The surrender deepens now, and the cave feels almost porous-less, like a chamber and more like a threshold. You sense movement, not just from the Onaroi, but from something older, stranger, not death, not quite life, something in between. This is where sleep edges toward prophecy. In ancient Greece, dreams were not merely private cinema. They could carry omens. In Homer's Odyssey, Penelope speaks of two gates of dreams, one of horn for true visions, one of ivory for false ones. That's a mainstream literary detail embedded in early epic tradition. Even then, the Greeks acknowledged ambiguity. Not every dream was trustworthy. Historians still argue whether this gate metaphor reflects early skepticism about dream interpretation or simply poetic flourish. Was Homer hinting at critical thinking, or just enjoying wordplay sense? The Greek words for horn keras and fulfill krano sound alike. The debate is ongoing and delightfully nerdy. You watch as a faint shimmer forms near the cave wall, like light bending without a source. It could be a true dream. It could be ivory nonsense. The uncertainty is part of the texture. In later Greek religious practice, certain sanctuaries encouraged prophetic dreaming. Most famously, temples dedicated to Asclepius invited the sick to sleep within sacred enclosures, hoping for divine instruction. Archaeological inscriptions from Epidaurus record specific dream visitations and cures. That's a mainstream historical fact supported by stone tablets still studied today. Historians still argue how literally these accounts should be taken. Were patients experiencing psychosomatic healing influenced by expectation? Did priests interpret dreams afterward to provide guidance? The lines between medicine, religion, and suggestion blur easily, but the practice itself is indisputable. You imagine lying in such a sanctuary, incense fading, anticipation thick in the air. Sleep becomes intentional, charged, different from collapsing after a long day. Back in Hypnos Cave, the atmosphere is calmer. No crowds, no formal petition. Yet the proximity to Lethe and the underworld lends dreams a certain gravity. The cave is close enough to mystery that messages might slip through. There's gentle humor in realizing that humans have always wanted dreams to mean something grand. You dream about missing a sandal in ancient Athens, and instead of admitting you're anxious, you assume it's a divine warning. Very on brand for humanity. Philosophers wrestled with this impulse. Artemidorus, a 2nd century CE writer, composed one Erecritica. That's a mainstream historical fact. He categorized dream symbols, meticulously teeth, falling out, flying, drowning, seeming predictive meanings. Historians still argue how representative Artemidorus' system was of broader Greek belief. Was he compiling widespread folk wisdom or shaping it? Regardless, his work demonstrates structured analysis of dreams long before modern psychology. You notice how the cave neither confirms nor denies prophetic potential. It simply provides the conditions: darkness, quiet, distance from noise. The Onaroi craft imagery, but meaning belongs to the dreamer. Their S also a fringe. Orphic tradition suggesting that initiates could train themselves to receive clearer dreams through ritual purification. Historians still debate the scale and influence of Orphic practices across the Greek world. But the concept of intentional dreaming persists. Modern neuroscience suggests that the brain weaves narrative from emotional memory fragments during REM sleep. That's a mainstream scientific understanding. Dreams can integrate unresolved feelings, sometimes offering insight not prophecy, but perspective. You lean further back into the stone, letting the shimmer near the wall dissolve. True or false, horn or ivory, the cave does not discriminate. It strikes you that Hypnos prefers this place because it sits exactly at the crossroads of uncertainty. Not fully rational, not fully mystical. A liminal corridor where images rise and fade without immediate judgment. Historians still argue whether ancient Greeks were more superstitious than modern societies. In truth, the difference may be smaller than we assume. Humans everywhere look for patterns in the dark. The cave does not mock that instinct. It simply holds it gently. Your thoughts blur slightly now. The line between observation and imagination thins. Perhaps prophecy is less about predicting the future and more about allowing the present to rearrange itself quietly. And here, in the hush of stone and shadow, dreams are free to try. The shimmer fades, prophecy dissolving back into possibility, and the cave returns to its steadier rhythm. Yet something lingers in awareness that sleep does more than restore the body or spin quiet narratives. It travels. It crosses boundaries you barely notice while awake. You feel that boundary now. The thin membrane between worlds. In Greek mythology, sleep is often portrayed as a liminal static crossing point between the mortal realm and the divine or chthonic realms. Hypnos resides near the domain of Hades, but not within it. That's a mainstream mythological placement described in early. The geography itself implies transition. Historians still argue whether the Greeks conceived of the underworld as a literal physical place beneath the earth or as a symbolic cosmological layer. Archaeological sites like necropolis show elaborate burial customs, suggesting strong beliefs about an afterlife. Yet the exact nature of that belief varied over centuries. You imagine walking just a little deeper into the cave, not descending into death, but brushing its border. The air cools further, not cold, just still, the kind of stillness that feels timeless. In Homer's epics, the souls of the dead are described as shades intangible, diminished versions of their living selves. That's a mainstream literary depiction. When Odysseus visits the underworld in the Odyssey, he encounters these shades in a dim, mist-filled space. The imagery is strikingly cave-like. Historians still argue whether Homer's underworld imagery drew inspiration from real caves used in ritual contexts. It's plausible given Greece's landscape. You sense how easily the cave could extend into that mist, but it does not. It remains at the threshold. Hypnos escorts you to the edge, then stops. That boundary matters. There's gentle humor in imagining Hypnos as the ultimate responsible friend. He'll walk you home, but he won't let you wander into Tartarus unsupervised. Thanatos handles that shift, and only once ancient Greek funerary practices reinforced this boundary between sleep and death. The body was typically washed, anointed, and laid out before burial ritual called prothesis. That's a mainstream historical fact documented in art and literature. The deceased often appear in sculpture, as though peacefully asleep. The resemblance is intentional. Historians still argue whether this visual language softened grief or reinforced belief in a continued existence. Either way, sleep imagery made mortality less abrupt. The metaphor bridged understanding. You lean back again, aware that you are not crossing into death, only rehearsing its posture nightly. The cave allows practice without permanence. Modern sleep science reveals that during deep sleep, brain activity slows dramatically and consciousness recedes. That's a mainstream neurological finding. Yet, unlike death, the brain remains active, maintaining essential functions. The distinction is biological, even if myth blurs it poetically. The Greeks did not possess EEG machines, but they observed that sleeping individuals still breathed, still moved occasionally, still dreamed. Sleep was temporary departure, death was not. Historians still argue whether ancient people feared sleep less than we do today. Modern anxieties often revolve around productivity and lost time. In pre-industrial societies, rest aligned naturally with darkness. Fear of wasting time may have been less acute, though survival concerns certainly existed. You notice how calm the cave remains at this boundary. No dramatic tension, no ominous music swelling, just layered quiet. A fringe tradition in certain mystery cults suggested that ritual experiences simulated death and rebirth symbolically. Historians still debate how literal these initiatory metaphors were and what participants truly believed, but the recurring theme of temporary descent, followed by return echoes, sleep's daily rhythm. You breathe in slowly, out more slowly, still. The cave does not urge you deeper. It holds you exactly where you are, between light and shadow, between waking and oblivion. And you begin to understand something subtle. Hypnos prefers this quiet cave because it is positioned precisely at the hinge of existence. Not life, not death, but the gentle swing between them. A place where you can practice letting go, knowing you will return. The boundary hums softly, reassuring rather than foreboding. You remain on the safe side of it, and the cave remains patient, content to cradle the space between worlds. As you step deeper into the cave of sleep, a new presence emerges. This isn't the gentle haze of Hypnos or the random visions of the Underworld. This is precise, intentional. This is Morpheus at work. Morpheus, son of Hypnos, is the master of shaping dreams that perfectly imitate human forms. While his brothers craft symbols or animals, Morpheus can replicate a specific person, right down to their voice. He is the god of targeted messaging. Think of the Iliad, where Zeus sends a deceptive dream to King Agamemnon. The dream takes the form of a trusted advisor, urging him to attack Troy immediately with a promise of victory. It was terrible advice, leading to immense suffering, all because a king trusted a dream a little too much. Morpheus practices faces like masks, ensuring his message is subtle enough not to wake the dreamer, yet clear enough to be remembered. History pivots while a hero snores. But archaeological evidence suggests many cultures simply structured their lives around natural light cycles without constant dread. The night wasn't always the villain that modern horror films make it out to be. It was just a part of the daily rhythm of life. In Greek mythology, darkness isn't an evil force. It's personified as Nyx, the primordial goddess of night. Here, in this cave, you can feel her presence not as a threat, but as an embrace. Think of it as the original weighted blanket, but without the hefty price tag. There's also an evolutionary logic to this feeling of safety. Anthropologists have long observed that early humans used rock shelters for protection. Archaeological sites across Europe and the Mediterranean confirm this. Run your hand along the stone wall. Feel its steady coolness. There are no drafts here, no sudden noises, just layers upon layers of quiet. There's a theory in environmental psychology known as prospect and refuge. It suggests that humans crave a balance between having a clear view of their surroundings and being safely sheltered. Historians debate how universal this is, but here in Hypnos Cave, refuge is everything. There's no need for prospect, no need to look out for danger. Imagine Mount Olympus at night, probably chaotic, echoing with the arguments of gods. But this cave, it's predictable, stable, a sanctuary. Ancient Greek homes often reflected this idea. They were frequently built around central courtyards that let in light during the day but created shadowed, dim interior rooms at night. Archaeological excavations at sites like Olympus have documented this architectural style. Families likely shared sleeping spaces, and complete solitude was probably a rarity. This makes Hypnos' solitary cave even more significant. It's ironic, isn't it? Modern humans spend so much money trying to recreate what Hypnos achieved with just limestone and good location scouting. We buy blackout curtains, white noise machines, and memory foam mattresses, all in an effort to find what this cave offers naturally. Olympus offers luxury, but it doesn't offer peace. Marble halls echo, thunder rumbles, and the drama never sleeps. Here, in this cave, darkness doesn't startle. It wraps around you. Historians continue to debate whether mythic geography reflects psychological truths more than physical ones. Was this cave a literal, imagined place near the underworld, or was it a symbolic representation of the mind at rest? The ancient Greeks were masters of layered storytelling, so it's likely both interpretations have merit. As you settle more deeply into the hush, the darkness is no longer something to be navigated. It's something to lean into, to trust. The velvet sky of Nyx stretches overhead. Hypnos, the god of sleep, is somewhere nearby, content. There are no palace corridors, no golden thrones, just stone, shadow, and the steady, quiet rhythm of your own breath. You begin to understand that what feels so primitive is actually profoundly sophisticated. This darkness isn't emptiness, it is containment. The cave holds you gently, awakening the oldest, most fundamental instinct you possess, and you let it. Thanks for watching. If you found this journey into darkness and myth interesting, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow for more explorations into the stories that shape our world. The darkness has settled into you now, not as absence, but as structure. You can almost map the cave without seeing it: this curve of stone, that slow drip of unseen water, the faint murmur of lethe somewhere beyond the inner chamber. And as you grow more comfortable, you begin to wonder whether anyone ever tried to find this place in the waking world. After all, humans are notoriously bad at leaving well enough alone. If a god prefers a quiet cave, someone will eventually bring a torch and start taking notes. Archaeology gives us no confirmed cave of Hypnos. That's a mainstream fact. No plaque reading sleep god was here. But throughout the Greek world, caves were frequently used for religious activity. Excavations in Crete, Attica, and the Peloponnese have uncovered offerings, pottery, figurines, inscriptions left in cave sanctuaries. That's well documented. Caves were liminal spaces, natural temples shaped by earth rather than architects. Historians still argue whether specific caves were associated with particular deities consistently over centuries, or whether worship shifted fluidly depending on local tradition. Sacred geography was often regional, layered, and adaptive. One generation's nymph cave might become another's chthonic shrine. You imagine ancient shepherds stumbling across a deep cavern at dusk, goats reluctant to enter, air unnaturally still. Maybe someone leaves a small clay lamp just in case a god is listening. The next season, another villager adds a figurine. Over time, the cave accumulates quiet reverence. There's something endearing about that process. No grand temple commission, just incremental curiosity and mild superstition. Let's leave a bowl of olives here. Worst case scenario, a bat enjoys it. In several regions of Greece, caves were linked to underworld deities and fertility cults. The association between caves and the Earth's womb is a mainstream interpretive framework in archaeology. Historians still argue how consciously ancient worshippers conceptualized caves as symbolic wombs versus simply convenient, sacred spaces. Interpretation can sometimes run ahead of evidence. One intriguing, if fringe, hypothesis suggests that certain cave acoustics' natural resonance and echo may have enhanced ritual experiences. Modern acoustic studies of caves in the Mediterranean show unusual sound amplification in specific chambers. Historians still debate whether ancient worshippers intentionally selected caves for acoustic properties or if it was coincidental. But imagine chanting in a chamber where your voice seems to multiply. It would feel divine very quickly. You pause and listen here in Hypnos Cave. There is no echo, or if there is, it's so soft it dissolves immediately. This is not a performance cave. It's an absorption cave. Sound enters and disappears. Perfect for a god who values silence. In literary sources, the Cave of Hypnos is described as dark, surrounded by poppies and murmuring waters, with no rooster crowing to disturb it. That detail comes from Roman poet Ovid's Metamorphoses, a mainstream classical text studied widely. Ovid paints the cave as utterly insulated from Noisnodor's creak. No leaves rustle loudly. Historians still argue how much Ovid's description reflects earlier Greek tradition versus Roman poetic embellishment. By the time Ovid wrote in the 1st century CE, Greek myths had already evolved for centuries. His cave might be as much literary artistry as inherited theology. You run your fingers along the stone again, imagining centuries of hypothetical visitors doing the same. No inscriptions carved here, no votive tablets. Hypnos seems to prefer anonymity. There's gentle humor in realizing that if modern tourists discovered this cave, someone would immediately install mood lighting and a gift shop. Authentic lethe water now in reusable bottles, Hypnos would move out within a week. But perhaps that's the point. Sacred quiet cannot be commodified easily. It resists spectacle. Historians still argue whether ancient Greek religion was more experiential than doctrinal. There was no single sacred text governing belief. Practices varied widely by city-state. That flexibility allowed myths like Hypnos Cave to remain poetic rather than prescriptive. You didn't need GPS coordinates to understand the concept. The cave, then, may never have been meant to be found physically. It exists as an archetype of mental sanctuary. Modern psychology sometimes uses the visualization of a safe place during relaxation techniques. That's a mainstream therapeutic practice. Patients are encouraged to imagine a calm environment, often enclosed, quiet, softly lit. The resemblance to Hypnos' cave is striking. Historians still argue whether archetypal imagery persists across cultures due to shared human experience or cultural diffusion. Either way, caves recur in imagination. You feel the stone supporting you, cool and steady. No excavation team will catalog this moment. No tourist brochure will describe it. And perhaps that's why Hypnos prefers it. Not because it is hidden from maps, but because it is hidden from noise. A sanctuary that survives precisely because it does not advertise itself. You close your eyes, and the cave remains not as location, but as feeling. And that feeling is enough. The feeling lingers, but human time keeps moving. Empires rise, languages shift, gods fade and return in new costumes. And yet, somehow, this cave endures not as a pilgrimage site with brochures and guided tours, but as a story that refuses to evaporate. You sense the centuries passing like slow breaths. When the Roman world absorbed Greek culture, many deities were reinterpreted rather than erased. Hypnos became somnus. That's a mainstream historical cultural fact. Roman religion frequently adopted Greek gods, adjusting names and attributes while preserving core myths. In Ovid's Metamorphoses, Somnus dwells in a cave strikingly similar to the one you've been resting in. Dark, silent, surrounded by poppies, untouched by sunlight. That literary continuity suggests the image resonated deeply enough to survive translation across cultures. Historians still argue how sincerely Romans believed in these adapted deities versus treating them as literary tradition. By the imperial period, mythology functioned simultaneously as religion, art, and education. The cave may have been theological to some, metaphorical to others. As Christianity spread across the Mediterranean, overt worship of classical gods diminished. Yet sleep did not. Night did not. Caves did not vanish from imagination. They simply changed narrative roles. In medieval Christian tradition, caves often became sites of hermitage and contemplation. Monks withdrew into rocky enclosures to seek silence and divine communion. That's a mainstream historical pattern documented across Europe and the Near East. Historians still argue how much of this practice consciously echoed earlier pagan cave reverence versus emerging independently from practical solitude seeking. The parallels are difficult to ignore. You imagine a medieval hermit settling into a stone hollow, candle flickering faintly, seeking spiritual stillness. Different theology, same instinct, enclosure, darkness, quiet. There's a gentle irony in realizing that, while official doctrine shifted dramatically, the human need for retreat remained stable. Hypnos may have been renamed or dismissed, but the cave survived in spirit. Some fringe folkloric traditions in parts of southern Europe preserved faint echoes of ancient sleep spirits figures who bring dreams or press upon the chest at night. Historians still debate whether these stories directly descend from classical myth or represent universal nocturnal anxiety personified repeatedly across cultures. Sleep paralysis, for instance, has been interpreted as demonic visitation in medieval accounts. Modern science explains it neurologically. Same experience, different framing. You shift slightly, aware of how interpretation reshapes fear. In ancient Greece, a vivid dream might be Morpheus delivering a message. In medieval Europe, a nightmare might be a spiritual trial. In modern times, it's REM misfiring. The cave accommodates them all. During the Renaissance, classical mythology experienced revival. Artists revisited figures like Somnus and his winged sons. That's a mainstream art historical fact. Myth returned not as religious doctrine, but as aesthetic inspiration. Painters rendered sleeping figures draped in shadow, wings delicately poised at temples. Historians still argue whether Renaissance fascination with classical themes reflected genuine philosophical alignment or simply admiration for antiquity. Artistry. Either way, the image of the sleep god persisted quiet cave-bound, detached from thunderous Olympus. You can almost see the cave reimagined on canvas. Softened edges, romanticized darkness, poppies glowing faintly red. Not historically accurate, perhaps, but emotionally faithful. There's something comforting about that endurance. Even as belief systems transform, certain metaphors refuse extinction. Sleep remains a daily surrender. Darkness remains enveloping rather than annihilating. Modern literature, too, occasionally echoes the archetype of a hidden chamber of rest or dream. Fantasy novels feature caves where characters receive visions or undergo transformation. Historians still argue whether these narrative devices consciously draw from classical myth or tap into deeper narrative archetypes shared globally. It may not matter. The resonance persists, regardless of origin tracing. You realize now that Hypnos' preference for a cave was never merely about geology. It was about durability. Marble temples crumble, political structures collapse. But a quiet cavriel or imagined requires no maintenance. It adapts to language, theology, art. Even today, people speak of needing a cave to retreat into a room, a corner, a private mental refuge. The metaphor has not faded. You breathe in the unchanged coolness of stone. Outside, centuries continue arguing about doctrine, art history, cultural transmission. Historians still argue whether myth survives because it encodes psychological truth or because cultures consciously preserve it. The answer likely intertwines both. Here in the cave, survival feels simpler. Silence persists because it is renewable. Every night brings it back. Hypnosomnus sleep by any name never needed a palace to endure. Only darkness, only quiet, and the steady human willingness to close their eyes. The centuries thin out like mist, and you find yourself hovering somewhere between ancient limestone and modern drywall. The cave remains steady in your mind, but now something curious happens. You begin to recognize it elsewhere, not in myth, not in poetry, in your own life. Because when you think about it, your bedroom is a carefully engineered cave. Blackout curtains replace stone walls. A door shuts out Olympus-level chaos-traffic notifications. Someone reheating leftovers at midnight. You dim the lights. You lower your voice. You might even turn on a fan for that steady, cave-like hum. Hypnos would approve of the acoustics. Modern sleep science recommends cool temperatures, minimal light exposure, and reduced noise for optimal rest. That's a mainstream medical guideline, echoed by organizations like National Sleep Foundations. Historians still argue whether pre-industrial humans slept more soundly due to natural darkness or less soundly due to environmental vulnerability. Evidence suggests sleep patterns were segmented. People often woke briefly in the night before returning to rest. The idea of a perfect, uninterrupted 8 hours is relatively modern, so perhaps your cave doesn't need to be flawless. It just needs to be consistent. You realize that what Hypnos perfected mythologically, you replicate technologically. Memory foam mattresses, weighted blankets, white noise apps. There's something faintly hilarious about using advanced engineering to recreate what a limestone hollow achieved effortlessly. If ancient Greeks had access to blackout curtains, they might have declared them minor deities. Historians still argue whether the rise of artificial lighting in the 19th century fundamentally altered human circadian rhythms. The invention of widespread electric light associated with figures like Thomas Edison extended waking hours, dramatically that's a mainstream historical fact. Before electric lighting became common, nighttime activity was limited and often dim. Darkness once arrived decisively. Your cave now requires intention. You must choose darkness. Switch off screens. Silence alerts. Resist the siren song of just one more scroll. Olympus, in modern form, fits in your pocket and vibrates occasionally. Hypnos would absolutely move out if smartphones were allowed in the cave. You can picture him posting a stern sign near the entrance. No thunderbolts, no roosters, no blue light. And yet, even with all the distractions, the fundamental mechanism remains. When light fades, melatonin rises. When noise softens, your nervous system relaxes. That's mainstream physiology. Historians still argue whether our increasing exposure to artificial light contributes significantly to modern insomnia rates or whether stress and lifestyle factors play larger roles. Likely both intertwine. The cave is harder to access, but not impossible to recreate. You consider the architecture of your own rest space. Is it cluttered, bright, echoing? Or does it absorb sound gently, like these stone walls? Modern interior design trends often emphasize minimalism and muted tones for bedrooms. That's not accidental. Humans intuitively associate simplicity with calm. The cave teaches restraint, no decorations necessary, no grand throne, just functionality aligned with purpose. Sleep does not need spectacle, it needs consistency. There's a quirky fringe movement in contemporary wellness culture advocating grounding or sleeping closer to natural materials to reconnect with ancient rhythms. Historians still debate how scientifically robust such claims are, but the instinct to reconnect with elemental simplicity mirrors Hypnos' preference perfectly. You stretch out fully now, noticing how your body responds to darkness, almost automatically. Muscles release tension in small increments. Breath deepens without instruction. Ancient Greeks did not possess sleep tracking apps, but they observed patterns. Philosophers like Aristotle wrote about sleep as a necessary bodily function linked to digestion and heat regulation. That's a mainstream historical fact from his biological treatises. Historians still argue how accurate Aristotle's physiological theories were compared to modern science, but his recognition of sleep's necessity was unmistakable. Even without EEG data, they understood this. Sleep is not laziness. It is maintenance. Your cave modern or mythic exists to facilitate that maintenance. You smile faintly at the realization that every night you perform a small ritual inherited across millennia. Dim lights, change posture, withdraw from conversation, surrender control. The difference between you and an ancient Greek farmer may be smaller than expected. Different walls, same instinct. The cave does not demand belief in Hypnos. It does not require myth literacy. It only requires willingness to enter quiet. And so you begin to feel that the cave has never been a fixed location near the underworld. It is a design principle, a behavioral pattern, a nightly migration inward. You close your eyes not because you must, but because you can. The stone becomes mattress. The river becomes fan hum. The poppies become the soft blur behind your eyelids. And Hypnos, satisfied with your architectural choices, lets the quiet settle fully around you. The quiet has become so complete now that even the idea of centuries feels distant. Stone and drywall, Olympus and bedroom ceiling, Lethe and the hum of a fan, they blur gently together. You are no longer analyzing the cave. You are resting inside it. And perhaps that is the final lesson. Hypnos never needed spectacle. No lightning bolts, no marble colonnades, no dramatic speeches from mountaintops. That's a mainstream mythological observation. Unlike Zeus or Athena, Hypnos rarely dominates epic narratives. He appears briefly, does his work quietly, and withdraws. Historians still argue whether his comparatively minor role in surviving texts reflects lesser worship in practice or simply the storytelling priorities of poets who preferred war and heroism. Silence doesn't sell as dramatically as thunder, but silence sustains. You feel that sustainability now. The cave does not impose itself, it receives you. In Hesiod's Theogony, Hypnos dwells near the river Oceanus at the edge of the world. That's a mainstream textual detail. The edge never, the center. Always peripheral, always removed from noise. Historians still argue whether such mythic geography reflects ancient cosmology, literally or symbolically. Did Greeks imagine a physical edge where night and ocean merged? Or was it a poetic shorthand for remoteness? The debate continues softly in academic halls, but here in the cave, the symbolism is enough. Edges are peaceful, centers are loud. You realize that every night you drift toward the edge of your own awareness. Thoughts slow, names dissolve, responsibilities fade into gentle abstraction. It's not annihilation, it's recession. There's a mild humor in acknowledging that even the busiest modern schedule cannot outpace biology. You can ignore emails, you can delay chores, but eventually Hypnos taps your shoulder like a polite but immovable librarian. Time's up. Modern neuroscience confirms that sleep is essential for memory consolidation and cellular repair. That's a mainstream scientific fact. During deep sleep, the brain clears metabolic waste through what researchers call the glymphatic system. Historians still argue well scientists do about the precise mechanisms and how lifestyle influences this process. But the necessity of sleep itself is no longer debated. The ancients personified what we now quantify. They imagined a god because the experience felt external, powerful, unavoidable, and in a way, it still does. The cave remains around you, though its edges soften. The poppies no longer glow distinctly. The river's murmur blends with your breath. Even the idea of Lethe forgetfulness feels less ominous and more merciful, not erasure. Just pause. You consider how rarely quiet is celebrated. Achievement is loud. Celebration is loud. Even debate is loud. But restoration, it whispers. Historians still argue whether myths survive primarily because they entertain or because they encode psychological truths. Hypnos' cave may not thrill like a battle scene, but it endures because everyone, eventually, seeks it. You sink a little deeper. The stone or mattress supports you without commentary. There is no moral demand here, no quest to fulfill, just rest. And so the pacing slows now. Words lengthen, stretch gently like twilight shadows across a hillside. The air cools further, though never uncomfortably. Your breathing becomes the primary rhythm in the chamber. Inhale, pause, exhale. You are safe at the edge, not in the chaos of Olympus, not in the finality of the underworld. Simply in the soft corridor between. Hypnos prefers the cave because it asks for nothing except surrender. No offerings required, no hymns memorized, only willingness to close your eyes. The darkness does not press in. It cushions. It absorbs stray thoughts the way stone absorbs echoes. Even memory loosens its grip slightly, not lost, just set aside for morning retrieval. If there were roosters once, they are distant. If there were thunderbolts, they are far above rock and soil. Here, only stillness remains. Your body knows this terrain instinctively. It has walked here thousands of nights before. It recognizes the turn in the path where thinking fades and drifting begins. The cave grows softer around the edges, like charcoal smudged by careful fingers. Details blur, shapes dissolve. You do not need to understand every scholarly debate. You do not need to locate the cave on a map. You do not need to decide whether Morpheus crafts tonight's images or your neurons improvise them. You simply rest. Breath slows again. Shoulders release. The cool hush settles completely, like velvet drawn gently across the mind. And in that quiet, you understand fully why Hypnos chose this place. Because silence, unlike marble, never cracks. Because darkness, unlike daylight, never demands performance. Because the cave, whether ancient limestone or the quiet room you've prepared for yourself, holds you without expectation. Now the river's murmur fades into something almost indistinguishable from your own pulse. The poppies are only a suggestion of softness behind closed eyes. The stone is steady, patient, eternal. You drift a little further, but never too far. Just enough to rest.